In the early 16th century, the world was a much smaller place in human imagination, yet infinitely larger in reality than anyone dared to believe. The age of exploration had begun to reshape maps and minds alike, as European nations raced to find new routes to the legendary Spice Islands of the East Indies. Portugal controlled the eastern route around Africa, while Spain desperately sought an alternative path to claim their share of the lucrative spice trade. Enter Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese navigator whose bold proposal would change everything. Sail west to reach the East Indies, proving once and for all that the earth was round and that all its oceans were connected. What seemed like a simple concept would become the most ambitious voyage in human history. A 3-year odyssey that would test the limits of human endurance, seamanship, and the very boundaries of the known world. Of the nearly 270 men who departed Spain in 1519, only 18 would return in 1522, having completed something no human beings had ever achieved, a complete circumnavigation of the earth. This is their story, told through the eyes of one sailor who witnessed history being made at the cost of almost everything he held dear. It's a tale of extraordinary courage and devastating loss, of scientific discovery and human folly, of dreams that came true in ways no one could have imagined. Let's start today's story. Find a comfortable place, lie down, and listen to the remarkable journey of Magellan's crew. A voyage that proved the world was both smaller and larger than anyone had dared to imagine. You're standing in the dusty plaza of Seville on a sweltering August morning in 1519, listening to a man who speaks with the confidence of someone who has seen the edge of the world and lived to tell about it. Ferdinand Magellan, weathered and scarred from his years in Portuguese service in the East Indies, addresses the crowd of potential recruits with a voice that carries both authority and an almost mystical conviction. The world is round, he declares, his Portuguese accent thick, but his Spanish clear enough for everyone to understand. What Columbus began, we shall complete. The Spice Islands lie not just to the east, but to the west as well. Sail far enough west, and you will arrive in the east. You've heard whispers about this plan for months. The Portuguese navigator, who betrayed his homeland after a dispute with King Manuel, now serving Spain's young emperor Charles V. Some call him a traitor. Others whisper he's a genius. Standing here, watching his eyes burn with conviction as he unfolds maps and charts, you begin to understand why the Spanish crown invested a fortune in his vision. The 5 ships anchored at Sanlúcar de Barrameda represent the most ambitious expedition ever mounted. The flagship Trinidad, where Magellan will sail, is a sturdy carrack of 110 tons. The San Antonio, the largest at 120 tons, will carry the bulk of supplies. The Concepcion, Victoria, and Santiago complete the fleet 5 vessels that look small against the vastness of the Atlantic, yet represent the cutting edge of 16th century maritime technology. The recruitment process is unlike anything you've experienced. Unlike the brutal impressment common in other ports, Magellan's agents seek volunteers. They want men who understand they're embarking on something unprecedented, something that might cost them their lives, but could change the world forever. The pay is good better than most voyages, but the real attraction is the promise of glory and discovery. You sign your name in the ledger, committing to what the contract describes as a voyage to the Spice Islands by way of the western route. The legal language is precise, but it cannot capture the magnitude of what you're actually agreeing to undertake. In the margins of the contract, someone has sketched a rough globe showing the theoretical route west across the Atlantic, south along the American coast, through some unknown passage to the Pacific, then north and west to the Indies. The crew assembles slowly over the following weeks. Spaniards form the majority, but there are Portuguese, Italians, Germans, Greeks, and even a few Flemish sailors. The diversity creates immediate tensions, language barriers, cultural differences, and political suspicions that simmer beneath the surface. Many Spanish crew members openly question why they should follow a Portuguese captain, especially one branded a traitor by his homeland. Magellan addresses these concerns with characteristic directness during the final crew assembly in early September. Standing on the Trinidad's quarterdeck, he speaks to the 270 men who will accompany him into history. I know there are doubts among you about following a Portuguese captain, but I ask you this: does the wind care about nationality when it fills our sails? Does the sea distinguish between Spanish and Portuguese blood when it claims the unwary? We are sailors first, servants of discovery and exploration. Our loyalty is to the mission, to each other, and to the truth we will prove about our world. His words are persuasive, but you notice the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that continue even after his speech. The expedition carries the seeds of discord from its very beginning, tensions that will test everyone's resolve in the months ahead. The final preparations consume the last days of September. The ships take on supplies calculated for a 2-year voyage: hardtack biscuits, salt pork and beef, wine, olive oil, vinegar, cheese, dried legumes, and rice. The amount seems enormous as it disappears into the holds, yet you'll later learn how quickly 270 men can consume even the most generous provisions. Weapons and ammunition fill significant space cannons, arquebuses, crossbows, pikes, and swords. This is as much a military expedition as a voyage of discovery. The Spanish crown expects to establish trading posts and assert sovereignty over new territories. The Portuguese will not welcome Spanish intrusion into what they consider their sphere of influence. Navigation equipment receives special attention. Magellan personally oversees the loading of compasses, astrolabes, quadrants, hourglasses, and charts. Most intriguing are the secret maps he keeps locked in his cabin charts that supposedly show the Western Passage to the Pacific. Whether these maps represent genuine intelligence or hopeful speculation, no one but Magellan knows. On the 20th of September 1519, the 5 ships of the Armada de Molucca finally depart Sanlúcar de Barrameda. The morning is clear, with favourable winds from the northeast. Cannons boom in salute, crowds cheer from the waterfront, and flags snap proudly in the breeze. You stand at the rail of your assigned vessel, watching Spain recede into the distance, wondering if you'll ever see its shores again. The immediate challenges begin almost at once. The diverse crew struggles to work together efficiently. Language barriers create dangerous miscommunications during sail handling. Different maritime traditions clash when Spanish and Portuguese methods conflict. Magellan spends much of his time mediating disputes and establishing unified procedures that all nationalities can follow. Your first week at sea provides a harsh introduction to the realities of long-distance ocean voyaging. The ships, heavily loaded with supplies, ride low in the water and respond sluggishly to wind changes. Seasickness affects even experienced sailors as the vessels pitch and roll through Atlantic swells. The cramped sleeping quarters, shared among dozens of men, become stifling and rank within days. Food preparation presents immediate challenges. The ship's cook struggles to feed large numbers of men with limited fresh ingredients and primitive cooking facilities. Meals quickly become monotonous, the same salt meat, hardtack, and watered wine day after day. Fresh water, despite careful rationing, begins to taste stale and develop an unpleasant odour. Yet there are also moments of wonder that remind you why you joined this expedition. Dolphins race alongside the ships, their sleek forms cutting through blue water with effortless grace. Flying fish burst from wave crests in silver showers. At night, the Southern Cross appears in the star-filled sky, confirming that you're truly entering waters few Europeans have ever seen. Magellan proves to be a demanding but fair captain. He enforces strict discipline regarding safety procedures and ship maintenance, but he also ensures that hardships are shared equally among all crew members, regardless of nationality or rank. His personal habits are austere. He eats the same food as the common sailors and maintains the same watch schedule as his officers. As September becomes October and the Spanish coast disappears completely below the horizon, you begin to grasp the magnitude of what you've undertaken. You're part of an expedition that will either achieve something unprecedented in human history or disappear completely into the vast unknown. There will be no rescue ships, no way to call for help, no option but to push forward into waters that exist only on theoretical maps. The adventure has barely begun, yet already you sense that nothing will ever be the same again. The Canary Islands appear like green jewels scattered across the deep blue Atlantic, offering your first real rest since leaving Spain. After 3 weeks at sea, the sight of land brings cheers from crews who had begun to wonder if the ocean stretched on forever. You anchor at Tenerife, where Magellan allows shore leave while taking on fresh water, food, and minor repairs to equipment already showing wear from constant use. Walking on solid ground feels strange after weeks of adapting to the ship's constant motion. Your legs wobble uncertainly, and you find yourself unconsciously adjusting for swells that no longer exist. The local inhabitants eye your multinational crew with curiosity and wariness. 2 7-0 armed men represent both opportunity and potential trouble for a small island community. Magellan uses the stop strategically, not just for rest, but for final preparations. He meets privately with local Portuguese contacts, gathering the latest intelligence about African coastal conditions and Portuguese naval activities. These conversations take place in hushed tones, away from Spanish crew members who might question their captain's continued connections to his former homeland. The crew's leisure activities reveal growing cultural divisions that will plague the expedition. Spanish sailors frequent different taverns than Portuguese ones. Gambling disputes break out when men from different regions disagree about rules and stakes. Several fights erupt over women, wine, and national honour petty conflicts that Magellan must resolve with increasingly stern discipline. You spend your shore leave exploring the island's volcanic landscapes and talking with local fishermen about ocean conditions ahead. Their stories about the African coast mix practical advice with superstitious warnings about sea monsters and cursed waters. While you dismiss the supernatural elements, their descriptions of treacherous currents and unpredictable winds prove prophetically accurate. After 10 days in the Canaries, the fleet resumes its southward course along the African coast. The familiar landmarks of European geography fade behind you as you enter waters where only Portuguese ships regularly venture. The African coastline appears as a brown line on the eastern horizon, occasionally broken by river mouths and small settlements. Navigation becomes more critical and complex. Magellan personally takes celestial observations at dawn and dusk, using astrolabe and quadrant to fix the fleet's position. His calculations seem precise, but you notice increasing disagreements between his Portuguese methods and the Spanish pilot's preferred techniques. These technical disputes create another layer of tension among the leadership. The weather patterns shift dramatically as you sail south. The familiar Mediterranean climate gives way to tropical heat that makes working on deck exhausting during midday hours. The ship's interiors become stifling furnaces where even the lightest clothing feels oppressive. Sleep becomes difficult as temperatures remain high even after sunset. Fresh water rationing begins in earnest. Each man receives a carefully measured daily allowance that seems barely sufficient for the tropical conditions. The water itself, stored in wooden barrels for weeks now, develops a greenish tinge and unpleasant taste that forces you to hold your breath while drinking. Adding wine helps mask the flavour, but does little to improve the quality. Food storage problems emerge as the tropical heat accelerates spoilage. Salt pork develops a slippery coating that must be scrubbed away before cooking. Hardtack biscuits become infested with weevils that crunch between your teeth. The ship's rats, growing bold in their hunger, compete with the crew for accessible food supplies. Disease makes its first appearance among the crew. Several men develop mysterious fevers accompanied by severe headaches and joint pain. The ship's barber surgeon, whose medical knowledge consists mainly of bloodletting and herb lore, proves helpless against ailments he's never encountered. 2 crew members die within days of showing symptoms, their bodies committed to the ocean with brief prayers. The African coast provides occasional relief through contact with Portuguese trading posts. These encounters create delicate diplomatic situations. Magellan's Portuguese background enables communication, but his Spanish service makes him technically an enemy of Portuguese interests. The local factors treat him with wary respect, providing supplies and information while clearly reporting his movements to Lisbon. At one such trading post, you witness a disturbing exchange that reveals the darker aspects of European exploration. Portuguese slave traders offer to sell captured Africans to supplement the expedition's labour force. Magellan declines, explaining that he cannot add untrained personnel to an already complex multinational crew, but his refusal seems based on practical rather than moral considerations. The African coastline itself presents both beauty and menace. Pristine beaches stretch for miles, backed by dense jungle that teems with unfamiliar wildlife. At night, the sounds of unknown creatures create an otherworldly symphony that reminds you how far you've travelled from familiar European landscapes. During the day, mirages shimmer over the water, creating phantom islands and distorted coastlines that challenge navigation. Portuguese patrol vessels become an increasing concern as you move deeper into their territorial waters. These encounters typically involve formal challenges and document inspections, with Portuguese captains clearly under orders to monitor foreign vessels. Magellan's diplomatic skills prevent conflicts, but the constant surveillance creates anxiety among crew members who begin to feel like trespassers in hostile territory. The social dynamics among your diverse crew evolve under stress. Language barriers that seemed manageable in port become dangerous at sea, when quick communication could mean the difference between life and death. Work groups naturally segregate along national lines, creating inefficiencies that frustrate officers trying to coordinate complex sailing maneuvers. Religious differences add another complication. Catholic ceremonies conducted in Latin provide some common ground, but variations in saints' devotions and ritual practices create minor conflicts. Protestant crew members remain largely silent about their beliefs, understanding that religious nonconformity could bring serious consequences in Catholic Spain's service. As November progresses, the African coast begins curving eastward, a geographic reality that forces a crucial decision. Following the coast means entering the Indian Ocean, Portugal's exclusive domain where Spanish ships have no legal right to operate. Continuing south means leaving the known world entirely, sailing into waters where European maps show only blank space and speculative drawings of sea monsters. Magellan calls a meeting of senior officers to discuss navigation plans. For the first time, he reveals portions of his secret charts, showing theoretical passages through the American continent that might provide access to the Pacific Ocean. The Spanish officers study these maps with intense interest, while Portuguese crew members exchange knowing glances. They recognize intelligence that could only have come from classified Portuguese sources. The meeting breaks up with no final decision announced, but observant crew members notice course changes that begin steering the fleet away from the African coast toward the open Atlantic. You're heading into the unknown waters of the South Atlantic, abandoning the familiar coastal navigation that has guided the expedition so far. Standing at the rail during the evening watch, you contemplate the magnitude of this transition. Behind you lies everything familiar: European civilization, known trade routes, established navigation techniques. Ahead stretches the vast unknown of the South Atlantic, waters that might lead to the Pacific or might lead to nowhere at all. The gamble that began with signing aboard has escalated into something that will test human knowledge, courage, and endurance to their absolute limits. Your last sight of the African coast disappears into the evening haze, severing the final link to familiar geography. From now on, you'll be truly exploring sailing by theoretical maps, celestial navigation, and Magellan's unwavering conviction that the western route to the Indies actually exists. The South Atlantic reveals itself as a body of water unlike anything in European experience. For days, your 5 ships sail through an endless blue desert where the horizon forms a perfect circle around you, broken only by the occasional cloud formation or distant whale spout. The African coast has vanished completely, and the American continent remains a theoretical line on Magellan's charts. You're suspended between known worlds, in a maritime void that tests everyone's psychological endurance. The doldrums hit with devastating effect sometime in mid-November. The steady trade winds that have pushed you south suddenly vanish, leaving the fleet becalmed under a merciless tropical sun. The ships drift helplessly, their sails hanging limp in the stifling air. What little breeze exists changes direction unpredictably, making any consistent course impossible to maintain. Without wind to cool the air and move the vessels, the ships become floating ovens. The deck planking grows too hot to walk on barefoot during midday, forcing the crew to work in shifts during the cooler dawn and dusk hours. Below deck, the temperature becomes unbearable, a stifling hell where men gasp for breath and sweat pours from every pore despite minimal activity. Water becomes the primary concern as the expected 2-week Atlantic crossing stretches into its second month. Daily rations shrink from adequate to barely sufficient to potentially fatal. The water remaining in the barrels tastes increasingly foul, with a greenish scum forming on the surface that must be skimmed away before drinking. Men begin hoarding their meagre allowances, creating suspicions and accusations that threaten discipline. Magellan implements strict water conservation measures that affect everyone equally, including himself. Morning drinking is limited to a single cup per person. The evening ration depends on the day's work requirements. Men assigned to heavy labour receive slightly more, but the differences are carefully measured and publicly announced to prevent accusations of favouritism. The heat and restricted water intake create a cycle of weakness that makes every task more difficult. Climbing the rigging becomes exhausting work as men struggle with dizziness and fatigue. Even simple deck maintenance requires multiple rest breaks. Several crew members collapse during routine duties, their bodies unable to cope with dehydration and heat exhaustion. Food preparation becomes increasingly challenging as supplies deteriorate in the tropical conditions. Salt meat, develops a slippery, putrid coating that defies removal. Hardtack biscuits crumble into powder filled with weevils and their larvae. Cheese turns rancid despite being stored in the coolest parts of the ship. The crew jokes grimly about eating moving protein as they pick insects from their meals. Scurvy makes its first serious appearance among the crew. Men's gums become swollen and bloody, their teeth loosen, and purple bruises bloom across their bodies without any trauma to cause them. The ship's surgeon recognizes the symptoms, but has no effective treatment beyond bloodletting, which only weakens the sufferers further. The psychological toll of endless ocean and uncertain progress creates dangerous tensions among the crew. Men stare at the horizon for hours, desperately searching for any sign of land or changing weather. Rumours spread that Magellan is lost, that the theoretical Western Passage doesn't exist, that they're doomed to drift until everyone dies of thirst. Several crew members approach their officers, demanding to know the true plan and current position. Magellan addresses these concerns during evening assemblies, where he shows select crew members his navigation calculations. Using astrolabe readings and dead reckoning, he demonstrates that the fleet continues making southward progress despite the calms. His charts indicate they're approaching the latitude where the American coast should trend westward, potentially revealing the passage to the Pacific. The multinational crew's cultural differences become more pronounced under stress. Spanish sailors blame Portuguese navigation methods for their predicament. Portuguese crew members whisper that they should have followed the established eastern route around Africa. Germans and Italians find themselves caught between these factions, trying to maintain neutrality while tension increases daily. Religious observances intensify as desperation grows. Daily prayers become longer and more fervent, with men publicly promising pilgrimages and donations if they survive the voyage. Several crew members claim to have visions of saints or the Virgin Mary promising divine intervention. The ship's priest finds himself counseling increasing numbers of men who fear they're being punished for their sins. Gambling increases despite limited stakes, as men seek any distraction from their predicament. Card games and dice continue through the night, sometimes leading to violent disputes over worthless IOUs and promises of future payment. Officers must frequently intervene to prevent fights that could escalate into serious violence. The ships themselves begin showing signs of stress from the prolonged tropical exposure. Oakum caulking shrinks in the heat, opening small leaks that require constant attention. Metal fittings expand and contract with temperature changes, loosening crucial connections. Rigging stretches and sags, reducing sail efficiency when the rare breeze appears. Marine life provides occasional relief and wonder. Schools of flying fish launch themselves from the waves in silver cascades, sometimes landing on deck where they provide welcome additions to the monotonous diet. Dolphins appear periodically, their playful behaviour lifting spirits temporarily. Larger sea creatures, whales and sharks, remind everyone of the ocean's alien nature and hidden dangers. Christmas 1519 passes with subdued celebration. Limited supplies prevent any feast, but Magellan authorises extra wine rations and organises religious services that bring the multinational crew together in shared observance. Portuguese and Spanish carols blend in the tropical evening air as men remember distant homes and families they may never see again. The new year brings subtle changes in ocean conditions. The watercolour shifts from deep blue to green tinged, suggesting proximity to land. Bird sightings increase, with species that indicate nearby shores. Cloud formations on the horizon show patterns consistent with land masses beyond the visible range. Most significantly, the wind patterns begin showing more consistency, with regular afternoon breezes that provide modest progress. While still far from ideal sailing conditions, these changes suggest the fleet is approaching different geographic zones where normal weather patterns might resume. Magellan's navigation calculations become increasingly confident as celestial observations confirm steady southward progress. His charts suggest the fleet should encounter the American coast within weeks, potentially near the latitude where westward passages might exist. For the first time since entering the doldrums, there's reason for cautious optimism. Yet the toll of the South Atlantic crossing has marked everyone involved. Men are visibly thinner, their skin weathered by constant sun exposure. Scurvy affects nearly a quarter of the crew to some degree. Several deaths from fever and exhaustion have reduced the expedition's strength while increasing the psychological burden on survivors. As January 1520 approaches, you stand watch during the cooler evening hours, scanning the horizon for any sign of the American coast that should appear soon, according to Magellan's calculations. The endless blue that has surrounded you for months might finally be broken by the brown line of distant shores, and with it the promise of fresh water, better food, and progress toward the expedition's ultimate goal. The South Atlantic has tested everyone's resolve, but it hasn't defeated the expedition's determination to find the western passage to the Indies. Soon, you'll learn whether the American continent offers the route to Pacific waters that Magellan's vision requires, or whether new challenges await in the unknown waters ahead. Land appears as a thin brown line on the western horizon during the morning watch of the 10th of January 1520, the first solid ground you've seen since leaving the African coast 2 months ago. The sight brings cheers from crews who had begun to wonder if they were condemned to sail forever through empty ocean. Even the most experienced sailors feel their hearts lift at the prospect of fresh water, solid ground, and respite from the ship's constant motion. The Brazilian coast reveals itself gradually as the fleet approaches. Dense tropical forests stretch as far as you can see in both directions, broken by river mouths and sandy beaches that gleam white in the morning sun. This is the new world that Columbus discovered but never fully explored, a continent whose true size and shape remain mysteries to European cartographers. Magellan's approach to this unknown coastline demonstrates both caution and experience. Rather than heading directly for shore, he orders depth soundings to begin several miles offshore, searching for safe anchorage and avoiding hidden reefs that could destroy ships. The lead lines reveal a gradually shoaling bottom muddy sand that indicates river discharge and fresh water sources nearby. The first landing party goes ashore in armed boats, ready for anything from hostile natives to dangerous wildlife. You're part of the second group, assigned to search for fresh water sources while the initial scouts establish a secure perimeter. Stepping onto the sandy beach feels miraculous after months at sea-solid ground that doesn't move beneath your feet. Fresh air that carries the scent of flowers and vegetation instead of ship's bilge and human waste. The Brazilian forest proves to be a paradise of abundance that contrasts sharply with the deprivation you've experienced during the Atlantic crossing. Fresh water flows in clear streams that taste impossibly pure after months of stagnant barrel water. Tropical fruits hang from trees in varieties and quantities that seem almost fantastical. Oranges, lemons, bananas, and dozens of species unknown to European experience. Local wildlife provides both wonder and sustenance. Brilliantly coloured birds fill the forest with unfamiliar songs, while monkeys chatter in the canopy above. Hunting parties return with fresh meat that tastes like the finest European game after months of putrid salt pork. The abundance seems almost supernatural to men accustomed to careful rationing and constant hunger. The indigenous inhabitants approach the European visitors with a mixture of curiosity and caution. These coastal peoples have encountered Portuguese ships before, so they understand both the potential benefits and dangers of contact with heavily armed foreigners. Initial interactions involve careful exchanges of gifts, European knives, mirrors, and coloured beads for fresh food, local crafts, and information about the coastline. Magellan proves skilled at managing these cross-cultural encounters. His experience in the Portuguese East Indies has taught him the importance of establishing peaceful relations with local populations. He establishes strict rules for crew behaviour: no violence against natives unless in self-defence, no unauthorised trade, and no interference with local customs or religious practices. The fleet's extended stay along the Brazilian coast serves multiple purposes beyond simple rest and resupply. Magellan uses the time to conduct extensive coastal surveys, searching for any westward trending bay or river mouth that might provide access to the Pacific Ocean. His charts from Portuguese sources suggest that such a passage exists somewhere along this coast, but its exact location remains uncertain. Ship maintenance receives priority attention during the Brazilian layover. Months at sea have taken their toll on equipment and rigging. Carpenters repair hull damage from storms and constant working. Sailmakers patch torn canvas and replace worn rigging lines. The tropical hardwood forests provide excellent materials for repairs that would be impossible to complete at sea. Medical treatment for sick crew members improves dramatically with access to fresh food and clean water. Scurvy symptoms begin reversing within days as men consume citrus fruits and fresh vegetables. The ship's surgeon experiments with local medicinal plants, guided by indigenous knowledge of forest remedies. Several crew members who seemed near death recover enough strength to resume duties. The psychological impact of reaching land cannot be understated. Months of endless ocean had created a sense of isolation from the rest of humanity that affected everyone's mental state. Contact with the Brazilian coast restores connection to the living world and validates Magellan's navigation skills. The Western Passage might actually exist if his calculations have proven accurate so far. Portuguese presence along this coast creates diplomatic complications that require careful navigation. Several trading posts fly Portuguese flags, and their factors view Spanish expeditions with suspicion and hostility. Magellan's Portuguese background helps in negotiations, but his Spanish service makes him technically an enemy of Portuguese interests. These encounters require delicate diplomacy to avoid conflicts that could escalate into military action. The crew's behaviour during shore leave reveals both the benefits and dangers of extended liberty after months of rigid shipboard discipline. Most men simply enjoy the freedom to walk on solid ground, sleep without the ship's motion, and eat fresh food without restriction. However, some indulge in excessive drinking with local alcoholic beverages, leading to fights and disciplinary problems that require stern intervention. Cultural exchanges between European sailors and Brazilian inhabitants provide fascinating insights into both civilizations. The indigenous peoples demonstrate sophisticated knowledge of local geography, weather patterns, and navigation techniques that prove valuable for the expedition's planning. In return, European technology metal tools, firearms, and navigation instruments amazes locals who work primarily with stone and wood implements. Religious interactions create complex situations that reflect the era's spiritual concerns. The expedition's priest conducts Catholic services that attract curious local observers, while crew members observe indigenous religious ceremonies with varying degrees of respect and incomprehension. These exchanges highlight the profound cultural differences between European Christian and indigenous American worldviews. Magellan's search for the Western Passage intensifies as the fleet explores southward along the Brazilian coast. Each bay and river mouth receives careful investigation, with boats probing inland as far as navigation permits. The captain's frustration grows as each potential passage proves to be either too shallow for ocean-going vessels or simply a river system leading inland rather than westward to another ocean. Local intelligence gathered from indigenous informants provides tantalizing hints about the geography ahead. Tribal knowledge speaks of vast waters beyond the southern lands, but the descriptions remain vague and filtered through multiple translations. Whether these references describe the Pacific Ocean or simply larger river systems remains unclear. Provisioning for the continuation of the voyage requires careful planning and negotiation. The tropical abundance allows the ships to take on fresh food supplies, but preserving these provisions for extended sea voyages presents challenges. Techniques for smoking meat and drying fruits must be adapted to unfamiliar species and tropical conditions. Water collection receives special attention as the crew has learned the crucial importance of this resource during the Atlantic crossing. Every available barrel and cask gets filled with fresh stream water, and additional containers are improvised from local materials. The quantity needed to sustain 270 men for an unknown period requires nearly overwhelming the ship's storage capacity. As February 1520 approaches, pressure mounts to continue the expedition southward. The Brazilian coast has provided essential rest and resupply, but Magellan's mission requires finding the passage to the Pacific, not establishing a permanent settlement. Weather patterns suggest that seasonal changes might affect navigation conditions, making extended delays potentially dangerous. The departure from Brazil carries mixed emotions for the crew. Relief at having survived the Atlantic crossing and gratitude for the coast's abundance compete with anxiety about returning to sea and uncertainty about what lies ahead. The American continent has proven that Magellan's navigation was accurate, but the Western Passage remains theoretical until actually discovered. Final preparations consume the last days along the Brazilian coast. Ships receive final repairs and maintenance, supplies get carefully stowed, and navigation equipment undergoes thorough checking. Magellan conducts final meetings with local contacts, gathering any additional information about the coastline to the south and weather patterns that might affect the voyage. As the 5 ships weigh anchor and resume their southward course along the American coast, you stand at the rail watching the Brazilian forests fade into the distance. The New World has provided essential relief and renewed hope for the expedition's success, but the greatest challenges still lie ahead in the unknown waters of the South Atlantic and the hypothetical passage to the Pacific Ocean that will make or break this unprecedented voyage of discovery. The coastline south of Brazil reveals itself as an endless procession of bays, headlands, and river mouths that must each be investigated as potential passages to the Pacific Ocean. Every indentation in the shore might be the westward route that Magellan seeks, requiring careful exploration by small boat crews while the main fleet waits anxiously offshore. The methodical search tests everyone's patience as weeks pass without finding the crucial passage. You're assigned to one of the exploration boats, a dangerous honour that combines the excitement of discovery with the constant risk of unknown currents, hostile natives, and navigation errors that could leave you stranded far from the fleet. Each mission follows the same pattern approach: a promising bay or river mouth, conduct depth soundings to determine navigability, probe inland as far as conditions permit, then return to report findings to Magellan. The geographic diversity of the South American coast amazes everyone involved in the search. Tropical forests give way to temperate woodlands then to grasslands that stretch beyond the horizon. River systems vary from narrow streams to massive waterways that seem to drain entire continents. Each ecosystem supports different wildlife and indigenous populations with distinct cultures and technologies. Native encounters along this coast range from friendly to hostile, depending on previous European contact and local political situations. Some groups welcome the opportunity to trade with the well-armed strangers, offering food and local knowledge in exchange for European manufactured goods. Others, having experienced Portuguese slave raids or violent confrontations, attack exploration parties on site. The seasonal transition from summer to autumn creates changing weather patterns that complicate navigation. Storms become more frequent and violent, with winds that can drive the ships toward dangerous lee shores. Temperature drops significantly as you sail farther south, requiring adjustments to clothing and shipboard procedures designed for tropical conditions. Magellan's frustration becomes increasingly apparent as promising locations prove unsuitable for ocean-going vessels. Rivers that appear navigable from offshore turn out to be too shallow or filled with rapids. Bays that seem to trend westward curve back toward the east after several miles. Each disappointment delays the expedition and consumes precious supplies needed for the eventual Pacific crossing. The crew's morale fluctuates with each failed investigation. Initial enthusiasm for the search gradually gives way to skepticism about whether the Western Passage actually exists. Spanish officers begin questioning Magellan's Portuguese sources, suggesting that the secret charts might be deliberately misleading to prevent Spanish access to the Pacific. These doubts create dangerous tensions within the expedition's leadership. Food supplies from Brazil begin running low as the search extends beyond anticipated timeframes. Fresh fruits and vegetables spoil despite careful preservation efforts, forcing a gradual return to the monotonous diet of salt meat and hardtack that characterized the Atlantic crossing. Hunting parties supplement provisions when possible, but game becomes scarce in the more barren southern regions. The ships themselves show increasing wear from constant coastal navigation. Shallow water investigations damage hulls on hidden rocks and sandbars. Anchoring equipment suffers from frequent use in unfamiliar bottom conditions. Sails and rigging require regular repairs as storms and daily maneuvering take their toll on the fabric and rope. Water management becomes critical again as the fleet moves away from the abundant fresh streams of tropical Brazil. Rationing resumes, though less severely than during the Atlantic crossing. The ship's barrels contain adequate supplies for normal consumption, but the extended coastal search consumes more water than originally planned for this phase of the voyage. Indigenous knowledge proves invaluable for understanding local geography and weather patterns. Coastal peoples possess detailed information about tidal ranges, seasonal current changes, and storm frequencies that European charts cannot provide. However, communicating this information requires overcoming significant language barriers and cultural differences in describing geographic concepts. Several exploration missions encounter situations that nearly result in the loss of boats and crews. Tidal races in narrow channels create currents too powerful for rowing boats to overcome. Sudden weather changes trap exploration parties in dangerous positions with no immediate escape route. Navigation errors in unfamiliar waters lead boats far from predetermined rendezvous points with the main fleet. The most promising discovery occurs in early March when exploration boats penetrate deep into what appears to be a massive bay trending westward. For several days, hopes rise that this might be the sought-after passage. However, the waterway eventually curves back toward the Atlantic, revealing itself to be another large river system rather than a route to the Pacific Ocean. Magellan's leadership style becomes more authoritarian as pressure mounts to find results. he tolerates less discussion of navigation decisions and responds harshly to suggestions that the search should be abandoned. The captain's Portuguese background becomes a more frequent source of resentment among Spanish crew members who begin to question his loyalty to their nation's interests. The expedition's finances become a growing concern as the search extends far beyond original projections. Supplies purchased for a 2-year voyage must now sustain the crew for an unknown additional period while the search continues. Trade goods intended for the Spice Islands are being consumed for basic survival, reducing the potential profits that justify the expedition's enormous costs. Discipline problems increase as extended time at sea takes its psychological toll. Minor infractions that might be overlooked during normal voyaging receive harsh punishment as officers struggle to maintain order among increasingly restless crews. Flogging becomes more frequent, creating resentment that undermines the multinational cooperation essential for the expedition's success. The weather patterns encountered along the southern coast introduce new challenges for seamanship. Southern Hemisphere storms rotate in the opposite direction from European experience, confusing navigation and sail handling decisions. Temperature variations between day and night require constant adjustment of clothing and watch procedures as the fleet moves into unfamiliar climate zones. Communication between the 5 ships becomes increasingly difficult as storms and coastal navigation separate the vessels. Signal systems developed for open ocean sailing prove inadequate for coastal waters, where ships frequently operate out of visual contact. Several incidents nearly result in permanent separation of individual vessels from the main fleet. Wildlife encounters along the coast provide both wonder and practical benefits. Seals and sea lions offer opportunities for fresh meat and oil for lamps and cooking. Whale sightings become more frequent, with species unknown to European whalers. Bird populations indicate seasonal migration patterns that help predict weather changes and geographic features ahead. The indigenous populations encountered during the coastal search display remarkable diversity in terms of technology, social organization, and responses to European contact. Some groups have developed sophisticated maritime cultures with advanced boat-building techniques and navigation knowledge that rivals European capabilities. Others remain primarily land-based, viewing the ocean as a barrier rather than a highway. Magellan's private consultations with his charts and instruments become more secretive as doubts about the expedition's success increase. He spends hours alone in his cabin, studying navigation data and theoretical calculations that might reveal the passage's location. His isolation from the crew creates speculation and rumours that further undermine confidence in his leadership. The changing seasons bring new navigational challenges as daylight hours shorten and storm frequencies increase. Southern Hemisphere winter approaches, threatening to make coastal exploration impossible due to weather conditions. Time pressure mounts to find the passage before seasonal changes force the expedition to seek winter shelter or abandon the search entirely. As March 1520 draws to a close, the fleet approaches a latitude where the South American coast begins trending significantly westward according to Magellan's theoretical charts. This geographic change offers renewed hope that the Western Passage might finally be discovered, but it also represents the expedition's last realistic opportunity before winter conditions make further exploration impossible. The crew's physical condition shows the cumulative effects of months at sea with inadequate nutrition and constant stress. Scurvy symptoms reappear among men whose recovery in Brazil has been reversed by the return to preserved foods. Injuries from shipboard accidents heal slowly due to poor diet and unsanitary conditions. Several crew members show signs of psychological breakdown under the pressure of uncertainty and hardship. Yet despite the mounting challenges, Magellan's determination remains unshaken. His conviction that the Western Passage exists continues to drive the expedition forward when lesser leaders might have turned back. Whether this represents admirable perseverance or dangerous obsession will soon be tested as the fleet approaches the most critical phase of the search for the route to the Pacific Ocean. The discovery of Port San Julian comes at a moment when the expedition desperately needs shelter from the approaching southern winter. This natural harbour, protected by high cliffs and accessible through a narrow entrance, offers the security and resources necessary for extended anchorage. However, the decision to winter here rather than continue searching for the passage creates the conditions for the expedition's most serious crisis yet. The landscape around Port San Julian presents a stark contrast to the tropical abundance of Brazil. Barren plains stretch endlessly inland, broken only by scattered shrubs and occasional guanaco herds. The wind blows constantly from the west, carrying a chill that cuts through clothing and reminds everyone that they've sailed far from the familiar warmth of European latitudes. This is Patagonia, a land that seems designed to test human endurance. Establishing winter quarters requires transforming the ships from vessels of exploration into stationary bases for survival. Sails come down for extensive repairs, with every piece of canvas carefully inspected and mended. Rigging gets completely overhauled, replacing worn lines and checking every connection. The ship's hulls receive attention below the waterline, with divers working in the frigid water to repair damage accumulated during months of coastal navigation. The crew's living conditions improve somewhat with the ability to establish shore facilities. Temporary shelters, constructed from ship, timber, and sailcloth, provide relief from the cramped conditions aboard the vessels. Cooking fires on shore allow better food preparation and warmth during the increasingly cold evenings. Fresh water sources inland eliminate the rationing that has characterized much of the voyage. Hunting becomes essential for supplementing the dwindling ship stores. The local wildlife guanacos, rees, and various seabirds provides fresh meat that helps combat scurvy and improves overall nutrition. However, hunting requires expeditions inland that expose small groups of men to the dangers of becoming lost in the featureless Patagonian landscape or encountering hostile native peoples. The indigenous inhabitants of this region, whom the Europeans call Patagonians due to their large stature, prove to be nomadic peoples who approach the expedition with caution. Initial encounters involve careful exchanges of gifts, but cultural misunderstandings and European arrogance soon create tensions that threaten to escalate into open conflict. Magellan uses the extended winter layover to conduct detailed planning for the continuation of the voyage. His charts and calculations suggest that the Western Passage should be found somewhere south of their current position, but the exact location remains uncertain. The approaching winter makes immediate departure impossible, forcing a delay that consumes precious supplies and tests everyone's patience. The multinational crew's cultural tensions, simmering throughout the voyage, reach a boiling point during the enforced idleness of winter quarters. Spanish officers openly question why they should continue following a Portuguese captain whose secret charts might be leading them to destruction. Portuguese crew members defend their captain while suspecting their Spanish colleagues of planning betrayal. Food rationing becomes necessary, as it becomes clear that supplies must last through the entire winter season. The portions seem adequate for survival, but they're monotonous and insufficient for men performing heavy physical labour in cold conditions. Complaints about food quality and quantity become constant sources of friction between officers and crew. The psychological impact of isolation becomes severe as the reality of their situation sinks in. They're farther from European civilization than any expedition has ever travelled, in a land that offers no possibility of rescue or retreat. If Magellan's charts prove wrong, if the Western Passage doesn't exist, they face the choice between certain death attempting to return across the Atlantic or slow starvation in this barren wilderness. Discipline problems multiply during the winter months as boredom, fear, and resentment create explosive tensions. Gambling disputes escalate into serious fights. Theft of food and supplies becomes common as men hoard resources for personal security. Sexual tensions arise as months of celibacy and isolation affect psychological stability. Officers struggle to maintain order through increasingly harsh punishments. Religious observances intensify as men seek comfort and meaning in their desperate situation. Daily prayers become longer and more fervent, with crew members making increasingly extravagant promises to God in exchange for survival. The expedition's priest finds himself counseling men who believe they're being punished for their sins or tested by divine providence. The ship's equipment continues deteriorating during the winter layover, despite repair efforts. The extreme temperature variations between day and night cause wood to crack and metal fittings to loosen. Salt air corrosion accelerates in the humid conditions. Canvas and rope suffer from constant exposure to moisture and freezing temperatures that make materials brittle and unreliable. Medical problems increase during the winter months as poor nutrition, cold exposure, and unsanitary conditions take their toll. Respiratory infections spread rapidly among men, crowded into inadequate shelters. Injuries heal slowly and often become infected. The ship's surgeon, already overwhelmed by scurvy cases, faces diseases and conditions beyond his limited knowledge and primitive medical supplies. Exploration parties sent inland during brief weather breaks discover evidence of previous European contact in this region. Artifacts and indigenous reports suggest that other expeditions have visited these shores, though whether they found any westward passage remains unclear. This intelligence provides both hope and concern hope that the passage exists. Concern that others might have already claimed it. The most serious crisis occurs on Easter Sunday, the 1st of April 1520, when Spanish officers attempt to take control of the expedition through armed mutiny. 3 of the 5 ship's crews join the rebellion, demanding an end to the search and immediate return to Spain. The mutineers argue that Magellan has exceeded his authority by leading them into a suicide mission based on unreliable Portuguese intelligence. Magellan's response to the mutiny demonstrates both his determination and his willingness to use extreme measures to maintain command. Through a combination of cunning, bravery, and ruthless violence, he regains control of the rebellious ships within days. The failed mutineers face harsh punishment. Some are executed, others marooned, and the survivors pardoned only after accepting absolute submission to Magellan's authority. The aftermath of the mutiny creates a sullen, fearful atmosphere among the crew. Trust between nationalities has been shattered, with Portuguese crew members now viewed as Magellan's enforcers and Spanish sailors treated as potential rebels. The unity essential for the expedition's success has been replaced by suspicion and resentment that will affect every subsequent decision. During the winter months, one of the 5 ships, the Santiago, is lost during a reconnaissance mission to explore the coast further south. The vessel is wrecked on hidden rocks, though most of the crew survives the disaster. This loss reduces the expedition's strength and eliminates crucial supplies and equipment that might be needed for the Pacific crossing. As the southern winter gradually gives way to spring, preparations begin for resuming the search for the Western Passage. The months of forced inactivity have taken their toll on men and equipment, but they've also provided essential rest and the opportunity to address maintenance issues that might have proven fatal at sea. The expedition emerges from winter quarters weaker in numbers, but perhaps stronger in resolve, having survived the ultimate test of Magellan's leadership and their own endurance. The departure from Port San Julian carries mixed emotions for everyone involved. Relief at escaping the isolation and hardship of winter quarters competes with anxiety about returning to the dangerous search for a passage that might not exist. Behind them lie the graves of mutineers and victims of disease, stark reminders of the expedition's cost in human life. Ahead lie unknown waters and the possibility of either triumph or disaster. As the 4 remaining ships weigh, anchor, and resume their southward course, you understand that the expedition has crossed a psychological threshold from which there can be no return. The mutiny and its aftermath have eliminated any possibility of compromise or retreat. Success in finding the Western Passage has become not just the expedition's goal, but the only alternative to complete disaster for everyone involved. The coastline south of Port San Julian presents increasingly dramatic scenery as towering mountains rise directly from the sea, their snow-capped peaks visible even in the southern spring. This is the edge of the known world, where European maps show only blank spaces and speculative drawings of sea monsters. Each mile sailed brings you deeper into waters no European has ever seen, following a coast whose ultimate destination remains completely unknown. On the 21st of October 1520, the lookouts spot what appears to be another bay indenting the coast, just one more inlet to investigate in the endless search for the Western Passage. However, as exploration boats penetrate deeper into this waterway, excitement begins building among the crews. Unlike the numerous false hopes of previous months, this channel continues trending westward, without curving back toward the Atlantic. The entrance to what will become known as the Strait of Magellan initially appears no different from dozens of other coastal indentations already explored. 2 high headlands frame a narrow opening that leads into a bay of uncertain depth and extent. However, the tidal flows here are different, stronger, and more complex than simple river drainage would produce, suggesting connection to another large body of water beyond. Magellan personally leads the initial reconnaissance, taking a small boat crew into the unknown waters with characteristic determination. You're part of this exploration party, rowing against powerful currents while scanning the shoreline for signs of the passage's continuation. The strait reveals itself gradually, winding between towering cliffs and through channels so narrow that the ships will barely fit between the rocky walls. The geographic complexity of the strait becomes apparent as exploration progresses. This is not a simple channel, but a maze of waterways, islands, and dead ends that requires careful navigation to avoid becoming trapped in passages too narrow for escape. Tidal currents flow in opposing directions depending on location and time, creating navigation challenges unlike anything in European experience. Indigenous peoples inhabit these remote channels, living in temporary camps and travelling by bark canoes perfectly adapted to local conditions. Their knowledge of tidal patterns, weather changes, and safe passages proves invaluable, though communication barriers make information exchange difficult and uncertain. These encounters reveal human adaptability to environments that seem almost impossibly harsh to European standards. The weather in the strait presents constant dangers that test seamanship skills to their limits. Winds funnel between mountain peaks with terrifying force, creating sudden squalls that can drive ships onto rocky shores without warning. Temperature variations between day and night are extreme, with morning ice giving way to afternoon heat that creates unpredictable wind patterns and visibility conditions. Navigation through the strait requires skills and techniques never taught in European sailing schools. Dead reckoning becomes nearly impossible due to variable currents and irregular wind patterns. Compass readings are unreliable due to local magnetic variations. Progress must be measured in hundreds of yards rather than miles, with every turn revealing new challenges and potential dead ends. The crew's psychological state during the strait passage swings between elation and terror as the reality of their situation becomes clear. They're succeeding in the greatest feat of exploration in human history, yet they're also trapped in a geographic maze from which escape might be impossible. Every successful passage through a narrow channel brings both progress toward the Pacific and deeper commitment to a route that might lead nowhere. Food and water management becomes critical during the strait passage, as the extended navigation consumes far more time than anticipated. Rationing resumes as supplies calculated for open ocean sailing must stretch through weeks of complex coastal maneuvering. Fresh water sources along the shores provide some relief, but landing parties face constant dangers from rockfalls, sudden weather changes, and potentially hostile natives. The ships suffer significant damage during the strait passage, as constant maneuvering in confined spaces takes its toll on hulls and rigging. Collisions with barely submerged rocks open small leaks that require continuous pumping. Sails tear on projecting cliff faces during narrow passages. Anchoring equipment strains under the stress of powerful tidal currents that threaten to drag vessels onto dangerous shores. The most dramatic crisis occurs when the San Antonio, the expedition's largest ship carrying crucial supplies, disappears during the night, while anchored in what seemed to be a secure bay. Whether the crew deserted, was overcome by accident, or fell victim to treacherous currents, remains unknown. The loss of this vessel and its supplies creates a supply crisis that threatens the expedition's ability to continue to the Pacific and beyond. Several crew members suffer serious injuries during the strait passage, as the dangerous conditions create constant hazards. Men fall from rigging while attempting sail changes in high winds. Others are crushed by shifting cargo during violent maneuvers in narrow channels. The ship's surgeon works continuously treating cuts from flying debris, broken bones from falls, and hypothermia from cold water immersion. The psychological impact of the strait passage transforms the crew's relationship with their environment and each other. The scale and grandeur of the landscape towering peaks, pristine waters, and absolute isolation creates a sense of being privileged witnesses to creation itself. Yet this beauty masks deadly dangers that could destroy the expedition without warning or hope of rescue. Wildlife in the strait includes species unknown to European science. Seals and sea lions provide opportunities for fresh meat, while whales of unusual types navigate the same channels as the ships. Birdlife includes varieties adapted to the harsh conditions, their behavior patterns providing valuable information about weather changes and tidal conditions. The indigenous knowledge of the strait proves both helpful and limited. Local peoples understand specific areas in great detail, but lack comprehensive knowledge of the entire passage. Their seasonal migration patterns and resource utilization provide insights into the strait's geography, but cultural differences make it difficult to obtain systematic navigation information. Navigation equipment faces constant challenges from the unique conditions in the strait. Compasses swing wildly due to local magnetic anomalies. Depth sounding becomes essential but dangerous, as lead lines can be swept away by powerful currents. Celestial navigation is often impossible due to cloud cover trapped between mountain peaks or narrow channel visibility. The discovery that the strait actually connects to another ocean becomes apparent gradually as exploration progresses. Changes in watercolor, tidal patterns, and marine life suggest proximity to a different sea. The moment when lookouts first glimpse open water beyond the strait's western end represents one of the greatest achievements in the history of human exploration. On the 28th of November, 1520, after more than a month of dangerous navigation through the strait, the remaining 3 ships emerge into the vast blue waters of what Magellan names the Mar Pacifico, the Pacific Ocean. The sight of this new sea stretching endlessly westward toward the theoretical location of the Spice Islands represents both triumph and the beginning of perhaps even greater challenges ahead. The successful passage through the strait validates Magellan's vision and navigation skills, proving that the western route to the Indies actually exists. However, the cost has been enormous. 1 ship lost, supplies critically reduced, and the crew exhausted by weeks of the most dangerous navigation anyone has ever attempted. The Pacific Ocean spread before you promises either the completion of history's greatest voyage or the final chapter in an epic disaster. Standing on deck as the Strait of Magellan disappears behind the expedition's wake, you understand that you've participated in a geographic discovery that will change human understanding of the world forever. The strait represents not just a navigable passage, but proof that the Earth's oceans are connected, that skilled seamanship can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, and that human determination can achieve what seems theoretically impossible. Yet the vast Pacific stretching ahead reminds everyone that the greatest challenges may still lie ahead. The strait has been conquered, but the ocean beyond remains completely unknown, its size, dangers, and ultimate destination as mysterious as the passage you've just successfully navigated. The Pacific Ocean reveals itself as a body of water beyond anything in human imagination or experience. Day after day, week after week, your 3 ships sail northwest across an endless blue expanse that seems to stretch beyond the boundaries of the world itself. The ocean's apparent tranquility, which inspired Magellan's name Pacific, masks a desert of water that will test human endurance to its absolute limits. The initial optimism following the strait's successful passage gives way to growing concern as the ocean shows no signs of islands, land, or any break in its monotonous vastness. Magellan's charts, based on theoretical calculations and Portuguese intelligence, suggest the Spice Islands should be reached within weeks of entering the Pacific. Instead, you sail for over 3 months without seeing anything but water, clouds, and endless blue horizon. Navigation across the Pacific requires skills and techniques that European seamanship has never needed to develop. Without coastal landmarks or familiar star patterns, dead reckoning becomes the only method for estimating position and progress. Compass headings, estimated speeds, and time calculations must be maintained with perfect accuracy, as any significant error could result in missing distant islands and sailing into empty ocean forever. The crew's daily routine adapts to the demands of open ocean sailing on an unprecedented scale. Watch schedules become critical for maintaining the constant vigilance required for navigation and sail handling. Every man's duties increase as the reduced crew, following the loss of the San Antonio, must handle the same workload with fewer hands. Exhaustion becomes a constant companion as no one can afford to rest completely. Food supplies dwindle at an alarming rate as the ocean crossing extends far beyond any previous European experience. The carefully calculated provisions that seemed adequate for a 2-year voyage are consumed at rates that make completion of the expedition seem impossible. Rationing becomes increasingly severe, with daily portions reduced to near starvation levels that leave men weakened and struggling to perform necessary duties. Water becomes more precious than gold as the crossing continues without finding any source of replenishment. Daily rations shrink to barely enough for survival, forcing men to choose between drinking and washing. The water remaining in the barrels takes on an increasingly foul taste and colour, with green scum and floating debris that must be strained through cloth before consumption. Scurvy returns with devastating effect as the preserved foods lose whatever nutritional value they might have possessed. Men's gums bleed constantly, their teeth loosen and fall out, and purple bruises appear across bodies too weak to heal from minor injuries. The ship's surgeon recognises the symptoms but has no effective treatment beyond bloodletting, which only weakens the sufferers further. The psychological toll of the endless ocean becomes as dangerous as the physical hardships. Men stare at the horizon for hours, desperately searching for any sign of land that never appears. Hallucinations become common as malnutrition and exhaustion affect mental stability. Several crew members claim to see islands, ships, or monsters that exist only in their deteriorating minds. Discipline problems increase as desperation grows and leadership struggles to maintain order among increasingly desperate men. Theft of food and water becomes common as survival instincts override loyalty and honour. Fights break out over trivial matters as stress and hunger create explosive tensions. Officers must use increasingly harsh punishments to maintain the minimal order necessary for the ship's operation. The ships themselves begin showing serious signs of stress from the extended ocean crossing. Hulls work constantly in the Pacific swells, opening small leaks that require continuous pumping. Sails deteriorate from constant use and exposure to salt air and tropical sun. Rigging stretches and breaks under the strain of daily sail handling, requiring repairs with increasingly limited materials. Marine life in the Pacific provides occasional relief from the monotonous diet and offers hope that land might be near. Flying fish launch themselves from the waves in silver cascades, sometimes landing on deck where they provide welcome protein supplements. Dolphins and whales appear periodically, their presence suggesting possible proximity to feeding grounds near land. The weather patterns in the Pacific prove different from Atlantic experience, requiring constant adaptation of sailing techniques. Trade winds blow more consistently, but from different directions than European charts suggest. Sudden squalls appear without warning, testing the weakened crew's ability to handle emergency sail changes. Temperature variations affect both human comfort and equipment performance. Navigation equipment faces new challenges from the Pacific's unique conditions. Compass variations differ from Atlantic patterns, requiring recalibration of navigation calculations. Celestial observations become more critical, but also more difficult as unfamiliar star patterns replace European constellations. The astrolabe quadrant, essential for determining latitude, must be used with maximum precision when no other navigation references exist. The crew's physical condition deteriorates steadily throughout the crossing as malnutrition and disease take their toll. Men become skeletal figures, barely capable of performing essential duties. Injuries heal slowly or not at all due to poor diet and unsanitary conditions. Several crew members die and are buried at sea with brief ceremonies that remind everyone of their own mortality. Religious observances intensify as men seek meaning and comfort in their desperate situation. Prayers become longer and more fervent, with crew members making increasingly extravagant promises to God in exchange for survival. The expedition's priest conducts daily services that provide the only source of hope and community in the face of seemingly certain doom. Cannibalism becomes a topic of whispered conversation as food supplies near complete exhaustion. While never officially discussed or implemented, the possibility haunts everyone's thoughts as they contemplate what might be necessary for survival. The death of crew members creates opportunities for additional food that no one wants to acknowledge, but everyone understands. The discovery of the Mariana Islands on the 6th of March 1521, after 99 days without sight of land, seems like a miracle to the surviving crew members. The sight of green hills rising from blue water brings tears to eyes that had given up hope of ever seeing solid ground again. However, these islands also present new challenges, as their inhabitants have no previous European contact and uncertain intentions toward heavily armed strangers. The first landing in the Marianas requires careful diplomacy and preparation, as contact with unknown peoples could result in either salvation or disaster for the weakened expedition. The indigenous inhabitants possessed the fresh food and water essential for the crew's survival, but they also have the power to destroy the expedition if relations turn hostile. The Pacific crossing transforms every survivor in fundamental ways that will affect the rest of their lives. The experience of sailing across an ocean far larger than anyone had imagined possible expands human understanding of the world's true size and geography. Yet it also demonstrates the incredible capacity for endurance that human beings possess when survival depends on continuing forward despite overwhelming odds. Recovery in the Marianas begins slowly as bodies weakened by months of starvation and disease struggle to process fresh food and clean water. Several crew members die even after reaching land, their systems too damaged to recover from the crossing's effects. Those who survive begin the gradual process of regaining strength needed for the expedition's continuation. The Pacific crossing proves that the western route to the Indies exists, and that skilled navigation can overcome distances that seem impossible by European standards. However, it also demonstrates the enormous human cost of such exploration and the incredible luck required for survival. The ocean that seemed peaceful from the strait has proven to be humanity's greatest natural challenge, conquered at a price that makes every survivor grateful for life itself. The Philippines emerge from the Pacific blue like jewels, scattered across silk, their palm-fringed beaches and emerald forests, offering a vision of paradise to men who had begun to believe they would never see land again. After the devastating Pacific crossing, these islands represent not just geographical discovery, but salvation for the expedition's survivors. The sight of abundant fresh water, tropical fruits, and friendly inhabitants seems like divine providence rewarding your incredible perseverance. Your first steps on Filipino soil feel miraculous after months of ship-bound existence and near starvation. The beach sand is firm and warm beneath feet that had almost forgotten the sensation of solid ground. Coconut palms provide shade, while crystal-clear streams offer unlimited fresh water that tastes impossibly pure after months of foul barrel water. The contrast with recent suffering makes every sensation seem intensely vivid and precious. The indigenous peoples of these islands initially approached the European visitors with curiosity rather than fear. Unlike the remote Patagonians or isolated Pacific Islanders, these Filipino populations have experience with foreign traders through connections to Chinese and Southeast Asian maritime networks. Their sophisticated boats, metal tools, and woven textiles demonstrate advanced technological capabilities that surprise crew members who expected to find only primitive societies. Magellan's approach to Filipino contact reflects both his diplomatic experience from Portuguese service in the East Indies and his growing confidence in the expedition's historic significance. He establishes formal protocols for trade and interaction that treat local rulers with respect, while asserting Spanish sovereignty over territories claimed through discovery. These negotiations require careful balance between commercial necessity and political ambition. The abundance of these islands provides dramatic relief from the Pacific crossing's deprivation. Tropical fruits, bananas, mangoes, coconuts, and dozens of species unknown to Europeans offer the vitamins essential for scurvy recovery. Fresh fish, rice, and local vegetables create a diet that seems luxurious after months of putrid preserved foods. Men begin regaining strength and weight almost immediately after landing. Cultural exchanges between Filipinos and Europeans reveal fascinating contrasts in worldview, technology, and social organization. The island's inhabitants demonstrate sophisticated navigation techniques, metalworking skills, and agricultural methods that rival European capabilities in many respects. Their music, art, and religious practices represent complex civilizations that challenge European assumptions about primitive peoples. Medical recovery begins slowly, as bodies damaged by months of malnutrition and disease struggle to heal despite improved conditions. Scurvy symptoms gradually reverse as fresh food provides essential nutrients, but some crew members remain permanently weakened by the Pacific crossing. The expedition's survival depends on allowing adequate time for physical and psychological recovery before attempting further voyaging. The political landscape of the Philippines proves complex, with multiple competing rulers, tributary relationships, and ongoing conflicts that create both opportunities and dangers for European intervention. Magellan's diplomatic skills, honed during Portuguese service in similar environments, enable him to navigate these complexities while advancing Spanish interests and the expedition's practical needs. Religious considerations become central to Magellan's Philippine strategy, as he sees an opportunity to add Christian conversion to the expedition's achievements. The captain's personal piety, combined with the political advantages of religious alliance, leads him to emphasize Catholic missionary work alongside commercial and diplomatic objectives. This religious focus will ultimately prove fatal to both Magellan and the expedition's continued success. The crew's behavior during the Philippine sojourn reflects both relief at their survival and growing confidence in the expedition's ultimate success. Shore leave provides opportunities for rest, recreation, and cultural exploration that restore morale after months of desperation. However, extended contact with Filipino societies also creates temptations and complications that challenge military discipline. Trade relationships develop quickly as both sides recognize mutual benefits from exchange. European metal goods, firearms, and manufactured items command high prices from Filipino merchants eager for access to these technologies. In return, the expedition acquires spices, precious metals, and local products that validate the commercial potential of the western route to the Indies. The expedition's reduced numbers become apparent during Philippine operations, as the loss of the San Antonio's crew creates serious manpower shortages. Essential tasks require longer completion times, with fewer hands available for simultaneous operations. The death toll from the Pacific crossing has eliminated specialized skills that prove difficult to replace among the surviving crew. Navigation planning for the continuation to the actual Spice Islands receives attention during the Philippine layover. Magellan's charts and local knowledge suggest that the Moluccas lie relatively close to the southeast, accessible through familiar sailing techniques rather than another ocean crossing. For the first time since leaving Spain, the expedition's ultimate destination seems achievable within reasonable time and with adequate resources. The fatal error occurs when Magellan involves the expedition in local political conflicts that have no direct relationship to Spanish interests or the mission's objectives. His desire to demonstrate European military superiority and convert local populations to Christianity leads to increasingly ambitious interventions in Filipino disputes. These activities stretch the expedition's limited resources and expose the crew to unnecessary dangers. The decision to support the Christian ruler of Cebu against the traditionalist chief Lapu-Lapu of Mactan Island represents a catastrophic miscalculation that will cost Magellan his life and nearly destroy the expedition. The captain's confidence, based on European technological advantages and previous military successes, blinds him to the risks of engaging in local warfare with inadequate forces in unfamiliar terrain. The Battle of Mactan on the 27th of April, 1521, unfolds as a tactical disaster despite European advantages in weapons and armour. The shallow water approaches prevent effective use of ship-based artillery support. The Filipino warriors, fighting on familiar ground with superior numbers, neutralize European technological advantages through clever tactics and fierce determination. You witness Magellan's death during the chaotic retreat from Mactan Beach as Filipino spears and bladed weapons overwhelm the small European landing force. The captain falls while covering the withdrawal of his men, his body left behind as the survivors flee to their boats under continued attack. The man whose vision and determination made possible the first circumnavigation of the earth dies within sight of achieving his ultimate goal. The aftermath of Magellan's death creates an immediate leadership crisis that threatens to destroy the expedition when success seems finally within reach. The surviving officers lack both the captain's navigation skills and his diplomatic experience essential for operating in Asian waters. Internal conflicts between Spanish and Portuguese faction members, suppressed during the crisis of Pacific crossing, re-emerge with potentially fatal consequences. Filipino reactions to Magellan's death vary depending on previous relationships with the expedition. Some local rulers see an opportunity to eliminate European influence entirely, while others recognize continued benefits from trade relationships. The expedition's military reputation suffers severely from the defeat, reducing its diplomatic leverage in future negotiations. The practical problems created by Magellan's death compound rapidly as the expedition faces multiple simultaneous crises. Navigation to the Spice Islands requires expertise that may have died with the captain. Diplomatic relationships, established through his personal connections, face uncertain continuation under new leadership. Military security becomes problematic as Filipino attitudes shift from respect to potential hostility. The crew's psychological state deteriorates rapidly following Magellan's death, as the reality of their situation becomes apparent. They've achieved the impossible by reaching the Indies through the western route, but they've lost the leadership essential for completing the voyage home. Success and failure exist simultaneously, creating emotional conflicts that threaten individual and collective morale. Yet despite the catastrophic loss of their leader, the expedition must continue. Too much has been sacrificed, too much achieved, and too much depends on completion of the mission to allow despair to prevent continuation. Magellan's death marks not the end of the first circumnavigation, but the beginning of its most challenging phase as leaderless survivors attempt to complete what their visionary captain began. The Philippines have provided salvation from Pacific crossing, validation of the Western route's commercial potential, and contact with the sophisticated civilizations of the Indies. However, they've also claimed the life of the expedition's irreplaceable leader and created challenges that will test the survivors' ability to complete history's greatest voyage without the man whose vision made it possible. The immediate aftermath of Magellan's death plunges the expedition into chaos as surviving officers struggle to establish new leadership while surrounded by potentially hostile Filipino populations. Gio Cerro and Duarte Barbosa, the senior surviving officers, attempt to assume joint command, but their authority lacks Magellan's personal prestige and navigation expertise. The crew, traumatized by their leader's sudden death and uncertain about the mission's future, questions whether continuation is possible or wise. The political situation in the Philippines deteriorates rapidly as local rulers reassess their relationships with the weakened European expedition. Some who had allied with Magellan now see opportunities to eliminate foreign influence entirely, while others calculate that continued cooperation serves their interests despite the changed circumstances. The expedition's military reputation, damaged by the Mactan defeat, reduces its diplomatic leverage significantly. A second disaster strikes within days of Magellan's death, when a dinner invitation from a local chief proves to be a carefully planned massacre. Cerro, Barbosa, and approximately 30 crew members are killed during what appears to be a friendly social gathering. This treacherous attack eliminates much of the expedition's remaining and experienced leadership, and reduces the crew to fewer than 115 survivors, scattered among 3 ships that require more men to operate effectively. Juan Sebastian Elcano emerges as the expedition's new leader almost by default rather than design. A skilled Basque sailor who had participated in the mutiny at Port San Julian, Elcano possesses navigation experience and crew respect essential for maintaining expedition unity. However, his previous opposition to Magellan creates concerns about his commitment to completing the original mission versus simply ensuring the survivors' safe return to Spain. The decision to abandon the Concepcion demonstrates the expedition's reduced capabilities following the leadership massacre. With insufficient crew to operate 3 vessels effectively, the survivors strip the abandoned ship of useful equipment and supplies before burning her hull to prevent capture by potentially hostile forces. This reduction to 2 vessels, the Trinidad and Victoria, symbolizes how far the expedition has fallen from its original strength. Navigation planning for reaching the Spice Islands becomes critical as the survivors debate whether to continue the mission or attempt immediate return to Spain. Magellan's charts and notes provide essential information about the route to the Moluccas, but interpreting this intelligence without his expertise creates uncertainty about distances, dangers, and navigational techniques required for success. The crew's physical and psychological condition remains poor, despite the Philippines' abundance, as the stress of leadership changes and ongoing dangers prevents complete recovery from the Pacific crossing's effects. Many men remain weakened by scurvy and malnutrition, while others struggle with psychological trauma from witnessing Magellan's death and the subsequent massacre of their comrades. The survivors face increasingly difficult decisions about resource allocation and mission priorities, as their reduced numbers create challenges for operating 2 ocean-going vessels. Every choice, whether to continue searching for the Spice Islands or attempt immediate return to Spain, involves life or death consequences that no one feels qualified to make without Magellan's guidance and expertise. Filipino attitudes toward the expedition evolve rapidly as local populations recognize the Europeans' weakness and uncertainty. Some groups that had maintained neutral or friendly positions now see opportunities for profit through trade or plunder. Others continue honoring agreements made with Magellan, though their loyalty to new leadership remains questionable. The diplomatic skills required for operating in Asian waters become painfully apparent as the survivors attempt to negotiate safe passage and resupply agreements without Magellan's experience and linguistic abilities. Cultural misunderstandings that the captain had navigated skillfully now create dangerous incidents that threaten to escalate into fatal conflicts. Religious considerations complicate the expedition's situation, as Magellan's Christian conversion efforts have created both allies and enemies among Filipino populations. Some local rulers who had accepted Catholicism continue supporting the expedition, while traditionalist factions view the Europeans as religious threats that should be eliminated entirely. The practical problems of maintaining two ships with inadequate crews become apparent as essential maintenance tasks go uncompleted due to manpower shortages. Rigging repairs, hull maintenance, and sail handling require more hands than the survivors can provide, while maintaining adequate watches and defensive preparations. Trade relationships established during Magellan's lifetime continue providing essential supplies, but at increasingly unfavorable terms as Filipino merchants recognize the expedition's desperate situation. Prices for food, water, and equipment rise dramatically, while the value of European trade goods declines due to oversupply and reduced demand. The debate over mission continuation versus immediate retreat creates dangerous divisions among the surviving crew as different factions argue for conflicting strategies. Some men, led by Elcano, believe completing the voyage to the Spice Islands represents their only hope for justifying the expedition's enormous costs and casualties. Others argue that immediate return to Spain offers the best chance for survival. Navigation equipment and charts require careful preservation, as these items represent the expedition's most valuable assets for either continuing to the Moluccas or returning home. Magellan's secret maps and instruments must be protected from damage, theft, or loss, while being shared among officers who lack his expertise for proper interpretation. Medical care becomes increasingly critical as the expedition's reduced numbers make every surviving crew member essential for the ship's operation. The loss of trained personnel through disease, accident, or violence could prove fatal to the entire mission. However, the surviving surgeon lacks adequate supplies and knowledge to treat tropical diseases and combat injuries. The monsoon season approaches, bringing weather patterns that could either help or hinder navigation to the Spice Islands, depending on timing and route selection. Local knowledge about seasonal wind and current changes becomes essential for planning, but obtaining reliable information requires maintaining good relationships with Filipino informants who may have conflicting loyalties. Portuguese naval activity in the region creates additional dangers as the expedition enters waters patrolled by ships that consider Spanish vessels to be illegal intruders. Intelligence about Portuguese fleet movements and base locations becomes essential for avoiding conflicts that the weakened expedition cannot survive. The survivors' morale fluctuates wildly between hope and despair as they struggle to process their losses while maintaining focus on mission objectives. Some days bring optimism about reaching the Spice Islands and completing Magellan's vision. Others bring overwhelming grief for fallen comrades and fear about an uncertain future. By November 1521, after months of uncertainty and debate, the decision crystallizes to continue toward the Moluccas despite the risks and challenges. The survivors recognize that retreat offers no guarantee of survival, while success in reaching the Spice Islands could validate their sacrifices and secure their place in history. This choice commits them irrevocably to completing what Magellan began, regardless of the personal cost. The final preparations for leaving the Philippines involve careful planning and resource management as the expedition prepares for what everyone hopes will be the final leg of the outbound journey. Supplies must be calculated for the voyage to the Moluccas and the eventual return to Spain, while equipment and personnel are organized for maximum efficiency with minimum crew. As the Trinidad and Victoria weigh anchor and resume their westward course toward the legendary Spice Islands, the survivors understand that they're entering the most critical phase of the expedition. Success in reaching the Moluccas will validate Magellan's vision and prove that the western route to the Indies exists. Failure will mean that their leader's death and their comrades' sacrifices have been meaningless. The Moluccas appear through the morning haze like a fulfillment of every dream that has sustained the expedition through 3 years of unimaginable hardship. These legendary spice islands, source of nutmeg, cloves, and mace that command fortunes in European markets, rise from azure waters in volcanic splendor. The sight validates Magellan's vision completely. You have successfully reached the Indies by sailing west, proving that the earth is indeed round and its oceans connected. Your first breath of Moluccan air carries the intoxicating fragrance of spices that have driven European exploration for centuries. Clove trees cover the hillsides in dense groves, their aromatic flowers and buds creating a perfume that seems almost supernatural after years of salt, air, and ship odours. This is the source of wealth that justifies empires, the prize that has cost so many lives and consumed such enormous resources. The local rulers of Tidor Island welcome the Spanish expedition with ceremonies that demonstrate sophisticated diplomatic protocols and genuine enthusiasm for European contact. Unlike the complex political situations encountered in the Philippines, these rulers see clear advantages in Spanish alliance against Portuguese dominance in the spice trade. They offer formal treaties that grant Spain trading rights and territorial claims in exchange for military support against Portuguese encroachment. The abundance of the Moluccas provides dramatic relief from the constant scarcity that has characterized most of the voyage. Fresh tropical fruits, vegetables, rice, and fish create a diet that seems luxurious after years of preserved foods. Clean water flows from mountain streams, while local markets offer goods from across the Indonesian archipelago and beyond. Commercial negotiations begin immediately as both sides recognize the enormous potential profits from direct Spanish-Moluccan trade relationships. The expedition's European manufactured goods, metal tools, weapons, textiles, and religious artifacts command premium prices from local merchants eager for access to these technologies. In return, the ship's holds begin filling with precious spices worth fortunes in European markets. The crew's physical recovery accelerates in the favourable Moluccan environment as adequate nutrition and rest restore strength, damaged by years of hardship. Men begin regaining weight and muscle mass, while scurvy symptoms continue reversing with access to fresh fruits and vegetables. However, some individuals remain permanently weakened by the voyage's cumulative effects. Cultural exchanges between Europeans and Moluccans reveal sophisticated island civilizations with extensive trade networks, advanced maritime technologies, and complex social structures. Local knowledge of regional geography, weather patterns, and navigation techniques proves invaluable for planning the continuation of the voyage, whether eastward toward the Pacific or westward toward the Indian Ocean. The Portuguese threat materializes quickly, as intelligence reports indicate that Lisbon has ordered increased naval patrols to prevent Spanish intrusion into Portuguese territorial waters. Several Portuguese vessels operate in the region, their commanders under orders to capture or destroy Spanish ships found in what Portugal claims as exclusive trading zones. Military preparations become necessary as the expedition's reduced numbers make defence against Portuguese attack extremely difficult. The 2 remaining ships require major repairs after years of hard service, while ammunition and weapons need careful inventory and maintenance. Alliance with local rulers provides some security, but cannot guarantee protection against determined Portuguese naval assault. The question of return route planning becomes critical as the survivors debate whether to attempt Pacific crossing back to the Americas or risk Portuguese waters by sailing west across the Indian Ocean. Both routes involve enormous dangers: the Pacific's vast empty spaces versus Portuguese naval power and unfamiliar navigation in the Indian Ocean. Loading procedures for the spice cargo require careful planning to maximize value while maintaining ship stability and performance. Cloves, nutmeg, and mace must be properly prepared and stored to prevent spoilage during the long voyage home. The weight and volume of spices affect sailing characteristics, requiring adjustments to ballast and sail handling procedures. Religious activities continue as the expedition's priest conducts regular services and attempts to establish Catholic missions among Moluccan populations. Some local rulers show interest in Christianity, though political rather than spiritual motivations seem primary. The religious dimension adds complexity to diplomatic relationships and trading agreements. The ship's condition assessment reveals serious structural problems that threaten their ability to complete the return voyage to Spain. Years of tropical exposure, storm damage, and constant use have weakened hulls, rigging, and equipment beyond normal repair capabilities. Major reconstruction work becomes necessary to ensure seaworthiness for the Atlantic crossing. Intelligence gathering about Portuguese naval movements becomes essential for survival, as reports indicate that warships are actively searching for the Spanish expedition. Local informants provide valuable information about Portuguese base locations, patrol patterns, and fleet strength. But this intelligence must be evaluated carefully for accuracy and political bias. The Trinidad's seaworthiness deteriorates to the point where continuation becomes questionable, forcing difficult decisions about crew and cargo distribution. Attempts to repair her hull prove inadequate for ocean voyaging, creating the possibility that the expedition might be reduced to a single vessel for the return journey. By April 1522, the strategic situation forces a crucial decision about departure timing and route selection. Portuguese naval pressure is increasing, while the monsoon season approaches with weather patterns that could either help or hinder the voyage home. The expedition must choose between attempting Pacific return with both ships or Indian Ocean crossing with the Victoria alone. The fateful decision emerges to split the expedition, with the Trinidad attempting Pacific return to Spanish America, while the Victoria sails west across the Indian Ocean towards Spain. This division reflects both practical necessity and strategic wisdom. If one route fails, the other might succeed in proving the Western Passage and returning with evidence of the expedition's achievements. Juan Sebastián Elcano assumes command of the Victoria for the westward voyage, while Gonzalo Gómez de Espinosa takes charge of the Trinidad for the eastward attempt. The crew divides based on health, skills, and personal preferences, with both groups understanding that they may never see each other again. Final preparations consume the last days in the Moluccas as both vessels prepare for their separate voyages home. Supplies, equipment, and spice cargo are distributed according to each ship's requirements and capacity. Navigation instruments and charts are duplicated to ensure that both expeditions have adequate materials for their different routes. The emotional farewells between crew members reflect the bonds forged during 3 years of shared hardship and achievement. Men who have survived together through the worst imaginable conditions, now separate, knowing that success or failure in reaching Spain will determine whether their sacrifices have meaning or their achievements recognition. As the Victoria weighs anchor and begins her westward voyage across the Indian Ocean, you understand that the expedition has achieved its primary objective, reaching the Spice Islands by the western route and proving the Earth's spherical nature. However, the ultimate test remains ahead, returning to Spain with evidence of these achievements and validation of Magellan's revolutionary vision. The Moluccas fade into the eastern horizon as the Victoria sets course for the Cape of Good Hope and the long voyage home. Behind lie the graves of Magellan and dozens of comrades who died to reach these legendary islands. Ahead lies the final challenge of completing history's first circumnavigation of the Earth, carrying proof that human determination can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles and expand the boundaries of geographical knowledge forever. The Victoria sails into the Indian Ocean, carrying 18 European survivors and 4 Moluccan passengers. Her holds packed with precious spices worth a fortune in European markets if she can survive the 12,000-mile voyage home through Portuguese-controlled waters. This final gamble represents humanity's first attempt to complete a circumnavigation of the Earth, with success depending on navigation skills, weather, luck, and avoiding Portuguese naval forces that patrol these waters with orders to capture or destroy Spanish intruders. Elcano's leadership style differs markedly from Magellan's autocratic approach, reflecting both his more democratic temperament and the desperate circumstances that make crew cooperation essential for survival. Every major decision receives input from senior crew members, though final authority remains with the captain. This collaborative approach helps maintain morale among men who understand that their survival depends entirely on mutual support and shared expertise. The Victoria's condition creates constant anxiety as her hull, weakened by 3 years of tropical exposure and heavy use, requires daily maintenance to remain seaworthy. Pumping becomes a routine duty as small leaks allow seawater to enter the bilge steadily. The ship's carpenter works continuously to repair damage, but his limited materials and tools make permanent fixes impossible. Navigation across the Indian Ocean presents challenges different from previous legs of the voyage, as Portuguese charts and intelligence provide some guidance for routes and hazards, but using this information risks revealing the expedition's presence to Portuguese authorities. Elcano must balance navigation accuracy against security concerns, sometimes choosing less efficient routes to avoid areas of heavy Portuguese naval activity. Food and water rationing resumes with devastating severity as the crew realizes that supplies adequate for normal consumption will not last through the extended Indian Ocean crossing. Daily portions shrink to near starvation levels, with every grain of rice and drop of water carefully measured and distributed. Men begin showing familiar signs of malnutrition and scurvy that had characterized earlier phases of the voyage. The monsoon winds that dominate Indian Ocean weather patterns provide both assistance and danger for the Victoria's westward passage. Favorable winds can drive the ship rapidly toward Africa, but sudden changes in direction or intensity can create storms that threaten to destroy the weakened vessel. Understanding and predicting these weather patterns becomes critical for survival. Portuguese naval encounters become the expedition's greatest fear, as intelligence reports indicate that warships patrol major shipping routes with orders to intercept Spanish vessels. Several sightings of distant sails create panic among the crew, forcing course changes and evasive maneuvers that consume precious time and supplies. The constant threat of capture adds psychological stress to already overwhelming physical hardships. The crew's physical condition deteriorates rapidly under the combined stress of malnutrition, constant work, and psychological pressure. Scurvy returns with familiar symptoms: bleeding gums, loose teeth, and purple bruises across increasingly skeletal bodies. Several men become too weak to perform essential duties, forcing others to take on additional responsibilities despite their own declining strength. Water becomes more precious than the spices in the cargo hold as the Indian Ocean crossing extends beyond anticipated duration due to adverse weather and evasive routing. Rationing reduces daily allowances to barely enough for survival, while the remaining water develops the familiar foul taste and green colour that characterises long-stored supplies. Men begin hallucinating from dehydration and exhaustion. The ship's equipment continues failing under the stress of constant use and inadequate maintenance. Sails tear regularly and must be patched with increasingly scarce materials. Rigging lines part under strain, requiring repairs that weaken overall system integrity. The compass begins showing erratic readings that complicate navigation and create dangerous uncertainties about course and position. Marine life in the Indian Ocean provides occasional relief from the monotonous and insufficient diet. Flying fish, dolphins, and seabirds offer protein supplements when they can be caught, but the crew lacks energy and equipment for effective hunting. Every successful capture of fresh food feels like a miraculous gift that temporarily improves morale and nutrition. Religious observances intensify as desperation grows, and crew members seek divine intervention for survival. Daily prayers become longer and more fervent, with men making increasingly extravagant promises to God in exchange for reaching Spain safely. The expedition's priest, himself weakened by starvation, conducts services that provide the only source of hope and community among the suffering survivors. The psychological toll of isolation and uncertainty affects every aspect of ship operations as men struggle with depression, anxiety, and growing fears that they will never see home again. Hallucinations become common as malnutrition affects mental stability. Several crew members develop obsessive behaviours, constantly checking water supplies, hoarding tiny amounts of food, or staring at the horizon for hours, searching for land that never appears. Navigation calculations become increasingly uncertain as the Victoria's position must be estimated through dead reckoning without reliable landmarks or celestial observations obscured by weather. Small errors in course or speed calculations could result in missing the African coast entirely and sailing into the South Atlantic without adequate supplies for survival. The Cape of Good Hope appears on the horizon in late June 1522 like a beacon of salvation for men who had begun to believe they would die in the endless Indian Ocean. This rocky promontory, known to Portuguese navigators as the gateway between Indian and Atlantic waters, represents both achieved progress towards Spain and the beginning of the final and perhaps most dangerous phase of the homeward voyage. Portuguese presence at the Cape creates immediate dangers as this strategic location serves as a major resupply station for Portuguese fleets operating in the Indian Ocean. The Victoria must obtain fresh water and food to survive the Atlantic crossing, but any contact with Portuguese authorities could result in capture and imprisonment. Careful reconnaissance becomes essential for planning a safe approach. The decision to attempt clandestine resupply at the Cape reflects both desperation and calculated risk-taking, as the crew understands that continuation without adequate provisions means certain death, while Portuguese capture offers at least the possibility of eventual repatriation. Elcano selects the most expendable crew members for the dangerous shore mission, while keeping essential personnel aboard for immediate departure if necessary. The shore party's narrow escape from Portuguese custody provides fresh supplies, but confirms that enemy forces actively patrol these waters, searching for the Spanish expedition. Intelligence gathered during this encounter indicates that Portuguese naval commanders have specific orders regarding Spanish ships and their crews. The Victoria must depart immediately to avoid capture by patrol vessels that might arrive at any time. Rounding the Cape of Good Hope proves to be one of the most dangerous passages of the entire voyage, as the weakened ship and exhausted crew face some of the world's worst sea conditions. Gigantic waves generated by Southern Ocean storms create mountainous seas that threaten to overwhelm the Victoria's damaged hull. Gale-force winds require constant sail handling by men barely strong enough to climb the rigging. The successful passage into the South Atlantic Ocean represents a tremendous achievement, but also highlights how much of the voyage still remains. The Victoria has completed 3/4 of her circumnavigation, but the final quarter includes some of the most dangerous waters in the world and requires crossing the Atlantic with minimal supplies and a crew reduced to the absolute minimum needed for ship operation. As the African coast falls behind and the Victoria begins her final ocean crossing towards Spain, you understand that you've participated in humanity's greatest feat of exploration and navigation. The ship carries not just precious spices, but proof that the Earth's oceans are connected, that skilled seamanship can overcome seemingly impossible distances, and that human determination can achieve what theoretical knowledge suggests might be possible. Yet the most challenging part of the voyage may still lie ahead. The South Atlantic has already tested the expedition's endurance during the outbound journey, and now you must cross it again in a ship damaged beyond proper repair and with a crew reduced to the minimum necessary for survival. Success will validate Magellan's vision and secure your place in history. Failure will mean that 3 years of incredible hardship and achievement will be lost forever in the ocean's depths. The South Atlantic Ocean that nearly destroyed the expedition during the outbound voyage now presents its final challenge to the Victoria's 18 surviving crew members. This familiar yet treacherous body of water stretches endlessly between the African coast and the distant shores of Spain, requiring one last supreme effort from men already pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. The ship herself has become a floating wreck, held together more by prayer than by planking, yet she must somehow carry her precious cargo of spices and survivors across 4,000 miles of open ocean. The Victoria's structural condition has deteriorated to the point where every storm, every heavy swell, threatens to be her last. Her hull works constantly in the Atlantic swells, opening and closing seams that allow seawater to pour into the bilge. Pumping becomes a continuous duty, with every able-bodied man taking turns at the back-breaking work of keeping the ship afloat. The carpenter has exhausted his supply of materials for repairs, forcing creative solutions using cargo containers and even spice sacks to plug the worst leaks. Elcano's navigation across the South Atlantic requires extraordinary skill, as the ship's compass has become increasingly unreliable due to damage and age. Dead reckoning becomes the primary method for estimating position and progress, but small errors in calculation could result in missing the Spanish coast entirely. Celestial navigation using the astrolabe and quadrant provides some verification, but cloud cover and the ship's constant motion make accurate observations extremely difficult. The crew's physical condition has reached a critical state where several men lack the strength to perform essential duties. Scurvy has returned with devastating effect, causing teeth to fall out, wounds to refuse healing, and purple bruises to cover bodies that seem more skeleton than flesh. The daily food ration has shrunk to a handful of rice and a piece of salt meat so putrid that it must be swallowed quickly to avoid vomiting. Water rationing has become so severe that each man receives barely enough liquid to prevent immediate death from dehydration. The remaining water in the ship's barrels has turned black with algae and debris, requiring filtration through cloth before consumption. Men dream constantly of fresh water, and several have begun drinking seawater, despite knowing it will accelerate their death through salt poisoning. The psychological toll of the return voyage affects every survivor, as the proximity of home makes the possibility of dying within sight of Spain seem cruelly ironic. Hallucinations become common, as malnutrition affects mental stability. Some men see phantom ships or imaginary islands. Others become convinced that they've already died and are experiencing some form of purgatory for their sins. Religious observances dominate daily life as the crew seeks divine intervention for survival during this final phase of the voyage. The ship's priest, himself dying from starvation, conducts increasingly fervent services where men confess their sins and make desperate bargains with God for deliverance. Every minor improvement in weather or temporary easing of hunger is interpreted as a sign of divine favour. The spice cargo in the Victoria's hold represents a fortune that could justify the expedition's enormous costs and casualties, but only if it reaches European markets safely. Cloves, nutmeg, and mace, worth thousands of ducats, fill containers that double as ballast and building materials for emergency repairs. The irony of potentially dying while surrounded by wealth strikes every survivor as a bitter commentary on human ambition. Marine life in the South Atlantic provides occasional relief from starvation when flying fish land on deck or dolphins can be caught with improvised fishing gear. However, the crew lacks energy for effective hunting, and much potential food escapes due to weakness and inadequate equipment. Every successful capture of protein feels miraculous and temporarily improves morale among the desperately hungry survivors. Weather patterns in the South Atlantic prove both helpful and dangerous, as seasonal winds provide generally favourable progress towards Spain, but sudden storms threaten to overwhelm the damaged vessel. The crew's reduced numbers make sail handling extremely difficult during weather changes, requiring superhuman effort from men barely capable of walking without assistance. Equipment failures multiply as the Victoria's 3-year voyage takes its final toll on every mechanical system. Sails tear and cannot be properly repaired due to lack of materials and weakened personnel. Rigging lines part under normal loads, creating dangerous situation during routine operations. Even basic tools break from overuse, forcing improvisation with spice containers and cargo materials. The approach to European waters brings new anxieties, as the crew fears that Portuguese naval forces might intercept them even within sight of Spanish territory. Intelligence gathered at the Cape of Good Hope suggested that Portugal has issued orders for the expedition's capture wherever encountered. The survivors must remain vigilant against enemy warships even during the final stages of their historic voyage. Navigation landmarks become critical as the Victoria approaches the Spanish coast after months of open ocean sailing with uncertain position calculations. The crew scans constantly for familiar features: cloud formations over land, bird species that indicate proximity to shore, watercolour changes that suggest coastal proximity. Every potential sign of approaching land creates excitement, followed by crushing disappointment when it proves false. The sighting of Spanish territory on the 4th of September 1522 brings tears to eyes that had given up hope of ever seeing European shores again. The brown line of familiar coastline rising from blue water represents not just geographical achievement, but validation of 3 years of incredible suffering and sacrifice. However, reaching Spanish waters and safely entering port require final navigational precision from men barely capable of maintaining consciousness. The Victoria's final approach to Sanlúcar de Barrameda, the same port from which the expedition departed over 3 years earlier, tests every remaining resource of ship and crew. The vessel's condition makes harbour navigation extremely dangerous, as her weakened hull might not survive contact with pier pilings or anchor chains. The crew lacks strength for complex docking manoeuvres, requiring assistance from port personnel who initially cannot believe what they're witnessing. The emotional impact of reaching home port creates overwhelming reactions among the survivors as the reality of their achievement begins to sink in. They have accomplished something unprecedented in human history, the first complete circumnavigation of the Earth. Yet the cost has been enormous. Of the nearly 270 men who departed Spain, only 18 have returned to tell the tale of their incredible journey. The Victoria's cargo hold yields its treasure of spices as port officials inventory the cloves, nutmeg, and mace that validate the commercial potential of the western route to the Indies. While the quantities are smaller than originally hoped due to the expedition's reduced capacity, the spices represent proof that Magellan's vision was correct and that Spain can access Asian markets through westward navigation. As you set foot on Spanish soil for the first time in over 3 years, your legs wobble unsteadily after months of shipboard existence and near starvation. The solid ground feels miraculous beneath feet that had almost forgotten the sensation of earth that doesn't move with ocean swells. The familiar sounds of Spanish voices, church bells, and marketplace activity seem impossibly wonderful after years of hearing only wind, water, and the voices of your dying comrades. The survivors' physical appearance shocks the port population as 18 walking skeletons emerge from a ship that seems held together by divine intervention rather than naval architecture. Your weathered faces, hollow eyes, and emaciated bodies tell the story of hardships beyond normal human comprehension. Yet you're alive, and you carry proof of the most remarkable voyage in the history of human exploration. The first circumnavigation of the Earth is complete. Magellan's vision has been validated through the sacrifice of nearly 250 men and the suffering of the 18 survivors who have proven that the world's oceans are connected and that human determination can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. The Victoria has returned home, carrying not just spices and survivors, but knowledge that will change forever humanity's understanding of our planet and our place within it. The cathedral bells of Seville ring out across the city as news spreads that 18 men have accomplished what no human beings in history have ever achieved. They have sailed completely around the world. Your bare feet, hardened by 3 years of shipboard life, touch the stone steps of the cathedral, where you and your surviving companions fulfill the vow made during the voyage's darkest hours. To walk barefoot in pilgrimage, carrying candles, to give thanks for surviving humanity's greatest maritime adventure. The crowds that gather to witness your arrival stare in amazement at the walking skeletons who claim to have circumnavigated the Earth. Your appearance tells the story more eloquently than words. Hollowed cheeks, yellowed teeth, scars from tropical diseases, and bodies so emaciated that your clothes hang like rags on skeletal frames. These are the physical marks of a voyage that tested human endurance beyond all previous limits. Court officials arrived to record your testimonies about the expedition's achievements and discoveries. The scribes struggle to comprehend the scope of what you've accomplished as you describe sailing through an unknown strait at the bottom of the world, crossing a Pacific Ocean far larger than anyone imagined possible, and reaching the Spice Islands by sailing west from Spain. Your words will reshape European understanding of global geography forever. The Victoria herself becomes an object of wonder and reverence as shipwrights examine the vessel that completed the first circumnavigation. Her hull, riddled with wormholes and held together by prayers and improvised repairs, represents a testament to both human craftsmanship and the incredible forces she has endured. Plans are made to preserve her as a monument to Spanish exploration and Magellan's revolutionary vision. The spice cargo unloaded from the Victoria's holds validates the commercial potential of the western route to the Indies. Though the quantities are far smaller than originally projected due to the expedition's reduced capacity and numerous disasters. The cloves, nutmeg, and mace represent not just monetary value, but proof that Spain can access Asian markets without Portuguese interference, potentially revolutionizing global trade patterns. Emperor Charles V receives your reports with intense interest as the political implications of your achievement become apparent. Spain now has legitimate claims to territory in the Pacific and Spice Islands based on discovery and exploration. The western route provides potential access to Asian wealth without violating Portuguese territorial claims in the Indian Ocean. Your voyage has shifted the balance of global power. The surviving crew members find themselves transformed from ordinary sailors into national heroes whose names will be remembered throughout history. Juan Sebastián Elcano receives special recognition for his leadership during the voyage's final phase, though he consistently honors Magellan's memory as the expedition's true architect. The transformation from mutineer to celebrated navigator demonstrates the expedition's complex legacy. Religious authorities interpret your survival as divine providence, viewing the expedition's success as evidence of God's favor towards Spanish exploration and Catholic expansion. The conversion activities in the Philippines, despite their tragic consequences for Magellan, are celebrated as evidence of Spanish commitment to spreading Christianity alongside commercial interests. The families of men who died during the voyage receive official notification of their relatives' sacrifices, though many had already assumed the worst after 3 years without communication. For every joyful reunion of survivors with their families, dozens of households mourn men who will never return from the greatest adventure in human history. The expedition's human cost tempers celebration of its achievements. Geographic knowledge undergoes revolutionary revision as cartographers incorporate your discoveries into new world maps. The Strait of Magellan, the Pacific Ocean's true size, and the precise location of the Spice Islands require complete redrawing of global charts. Your voyage has doubled the known size of the Earth and proven definitively that all oceans are connected. The expedition's financial accounting reveals the enormous costs of global exploration as the expenses far exceeded the value of spices returned in the Victoria. However, the strategic and political value of your discoveries, combined with potential future profits from the western route, justify the investment in the eyes of Spanish authorities. Your voyage has opened possibilities worth far more than its immediate monetary returns. Medical examination of the survivors provides insights into the physical toll of extended ocean voyaging, as physicians document the effects of scurvy, malnutrition, tropical diseases, and psychological stress. Your bodies bear the permanent marks of hardships that have tested human endurance to its absolute limits. Yet you've survived experiences that killed the vast majority of your companions. The survivors struggle with psychological adjustment to life on solid ground, after 3 years of constant motion, danger, and uncertainty. Sleep comes fitfully as nightmares replay the voyage's traumatic events. Food tastes strange after years of preserved provisions and near starvation. The simple pleasure of unlimited fresh water feels miraculous after months of severe rationing. Stories of your adventures spread throughout Europe as the first circumnavigation captures public imagination and scholarly interest. Your descriptions of unknown peoples, strange customs, exotic animals, and geographic wonders provide material for books, maps, and artistic representations that will influence European understanding of the wider world for centuries to come. The fate of the Trinidad and her crew remains unknown, adding an element of tragedy to the celebration of your return. Attempts to gather intelligence about Gonzalo Gómez de Espinosa's eastward voyage across the Pacific yield only rumours and speculation. The men who chose that route have disappeared into the vast ocean, their fate a reminder of the expedition's ultimate costs. Portuguese authorities protest Spanish claims to Pacific territories and Spice Island access, arguing that your route violates existing papal divisions of global exploration rights. Diplomatic negotiations begin immediately as both nations seek to protect their interests while acknowledging the unprecedented nature of your geographic discoveries. The technological innovations developed during your voyage navigation techniques for open ocean sailing, methods for preserving food during extended voyages, and solutions to problems of crew health and discipline provide valuable knowledge for future expeditions. Your hard-won experience becomes the foundation for subsequent Spanish exploration in the Pacific. Personal rewards for the survivors include pensions, land grants, and noble titles that recognize your service to the Spanish crown and contribution to geographic knowledge. However, no material compensation can truly acknowledge what you've endured or replace the comrades who died to make your achievement possible. The expedition's greatest reward is the knowledge that you've expanded the boundaries of human possibility. As the initial excitement of your return settles into routine, the reality of your accomplishment begins to sink in. You've sailed completely around the world, proving definitively that the Earth is a sphere floating in connected oceans. You've discovered new continents, new oceans, and new peoples. You've demonstrated that human determination and skill can overcome obstacles that seem theoretically impossible. Yet the memories of fallen comrades haunt your dreams as you remember Ferdinand Magellan dying on a Filipino beach, your shipmates starving in the Pacific's emptiness, and friends succumbing to disease in tropical ports. The expedition's triumph is inseparable from its tragedy, success intertwined with incredible loss of human life. The first circumnavigation of the Earth is complete, but its consequences will echo through history as your voyage reshapes global politics, trade, and human understanding of our planet. You've returned home as heroes, but you've also returned as survivors carrying the weight of humanity's greatest adventure and the memory of those who made the ultimate sacrifice to prove that no ocean is too wide for human courage and determination to cross. The autumn of 1522 finds you adapting slowly to life in a world that has remained unchanged while you have been transformed forever by the greatest voyage in human history. The cobblestone streets of Seville feel strange beneath feet accustomed to pitching decks. The abundant food in Spanish markets seems miraculous after years of rationing and starvation. The comfort of a real bed replaces the hard planking that served as your mattress for over 3 years of oceanic wandering. Your body bears permanent reminders of the circumnavigation as physicians document scars from tropical diseases, joints stiffened by constant cold and dampness, and digestive systems damaged by months of putrid food and contaminated water. Yet these physical marks pale compared to the psychological changes that have transformed your understanding of human capability and the world's true nature. The maps being redrawn in Royal Cartographic Offices reflect the magnitude of your achievement as geographers struggle to incorporate discoveries that have doubled the known size of the Earth. The Pacific Ocean, revealed as far larger than the Atlantic and Indian Oceans combined, requires complete revision of global charts. The Strait of Magellan opens new possibilities for navigation, while highlighting the incredible dangers of global exploration. European scholars debate the implications of your voyage, as the first circumnavigation provides definitive proof that the Earth is spherical and its oceans connected. Ancient theories about world geography must be abandoned in favour of new understanding based on actual experience, rather than theoretical speculation. Your expedition has transformed human knowledge from conjecture to verified fact. The spice trade undergoes fundamental revision as Spanish access to the Moluccas through the western route challenges Portuguese monopolies established through decades of eastern expansion. Though immediate profits from the Victoria's cargo barely cover the expedition's enormous costs, the long-term strategic value of your discoveries will reshape global commerce for centuries to come. Your fellow survivors scatter to different fates as the expedition's end allows each man to pursue his own future. Juan Sebastian Elcano receives the greatest honours, including a coat of arms bearing a globe with the inscription Primus circumdedisти me. You were the first to circumnavigate me. Others return to their home regions, carrying stories that will be retold for generations. A few die within months of returning, their bodies too damaged by the voyage to recover fully. The indigenous peoples encountered during your journey, the Patagonians, Pacific Islanders, and Filipinos, have been forever changed by European contact, though they could never have imagined the global consequences of your brief visits. Your expedition opened sea routes that will bring colonization, Christianity, and cultural transformation to societies that had developed in isolation for millennia. Ferdinand Magellan's reputation evolves from that of a Portuguese traitor to recognition as one of history's greatest explorers, though he never lived to see the completion of his vision. His grave on Mactan Island becomes a symbol of the sacrifices required for human progress, while his navigation techniques and leadership methods influence subsequent generations of explorers. The technological innovations developed during your voyage, methods for food preservation, techniques for open ocean navigation, and solutions to problems of crew health and discipline provide the foundation for future Spanish exploration in the Pacific. Your hard-won experience becomes invaluable knowledge for subsequent expeditions attempting to follow the route you pioneered. Religious authorities incorporate your discoveries into theological understanding as the existence of previously unknown peoples and lands raises questions about biblical geography and the spread of Christianity. The conversion activities in the Philippines, despite their tragic consequences, are viewed as evidence of divine providence guiding Spanish expansion and Catholic evangelization. The diplomatic consequences of your voyage create ongoing tensions between Spain and Portugal, as both nations claim territorial rights in the newly discovered Pacific Ocean and Spice Islands. The Treaty of Zaragoza, negotiated years later, will attempt to resolve these disputes. But the fundamental question of global territorial division remains contentious for decades. Your personal adjustment to civilian life proves challenging, as the routine of normal existence seems impossibly mundane after 3 years of constant adventure, danger, and discovery. The men who share your experiences are few, and civilians cannot truly comprehend what you've endured or achieved. You find yourself drawn to taverns near the harbour, where the sound of rigging and smell of salt air provide connection to your transformed identity. Dreams and nightmares blend memories of the voyage's triumphs and tragedies, as your sleep is filled with images of Magellan falling on Filipino beaches, comrades dying of starvation in the Pacific's emptiness, and the miraculous sight of the Victoria limping into Seville harbour. These mental echoes of the circumnavigation will accompany you for the rest of your life. The written accounts of your voyage, compiled from survivor testimonies and ship records, begin circulating among European intellectuals and inspire future generations of explorers. Antonio Pigafetta's detailed chronicle, in particular, provides a comprehensive record that will become one of history's most important travel narratives, preserving the memory of humanity's first global voyage. Economic analysis of the expedition reveals the enormous costs of global exploration. As the expenses far exceeded immediate profits, Yet the strategic value of opening new trade routes and claiming new territories justifies the investment from a national perspective. Your voyage has proven that global commerce is possible, though profitable exploitation requires systematic development over decades. The families of men who died during the voyage receive official recognition and modest pensions, though no compensation can truly acknowledge the sacrifice of fathers, sons, and husbands who perished to expand the boundaries of human knowledge. Memorial services honor their contributions, while you survivors serve as living testaments to their memory and achievement. Scientific understanding advances significantly as your observations of celestial navigation, ocean currents, weather patterns, and geographic features provide data that improves European knowledge of global conditions. Your practical experience becomes the foundation for theoretical advances in navigation, cartography, and natural philosophy. The cultural impact of your voyage extends beyond immediate political and economic consequences, as stories of your adventures capture popular imagination throughout Europe. Artists, writers, and scholars draw inspiration from your discoveries, creating works that spread awareness of the world's diversity and the possibilities for human achievement through courage and determination. Military strategists study your expedition's experiences to understand the challenges of global naval operations, supply line management, and crew discipline during extended voyages. The lessons learned from your successes and failures influence Spanish naval policy and exploration planning for subsequent Pacific expeditions. Your age advances more rapidly than your actual years would suggest, as the physical and psychological stresses of the circumnavigation have accelerated the normal processes of aging. Your weathered appearance and deliberate movements reflect experiences that have compressed a lifetime of adventure into 3 extraordinary years of global wandering. The question of whether the circumnavigation was worth its enormous cost in human lives continues to haunt your thoughts as you weigh the expedition's achievements against the memory of 250 comrades who died to make those achievements possible. The answer changes depending on your mood and the passage of time, but the question never entirely disappears. The mystery of the Trinidad's fate haunts the survivors, as rumours and fragmentary reports suggest that Gonzalo Gimez de Espinosa's attempt to return across the Pacific ended in disaster. The men who chose that route have disappeared into oceanic immensity, their sacrifice adding to the expedition's already enormous human cost, while highlighting the incredible luck required for your own survival. Historical perspective begins to emerge as the immediate excitement of your return settles into routine, and scholars begin analysing the expedition's broader significance. Your voyage has proven that the Earth's oceans are connected, that skilled navigation can overcome seemingly impossible distances, and that human determination can achieve what theoretical knowledge suggests might be possible. The transformation of your own identity from ordinary sailor to historic figure proves difficult to process as you struggle to reconcile your memories of fear, hunger, and desperation with others' perceptions of heroic achievement. You participated in humanity's greatest adventure, yet much of the experience felt like a desperate struggle for survival rather than glorious exploration. As 1,522 draws to a close, and you reflect on the year that saw completion of the first circumnavigation, you understand that you've witnessed and participated in events that will be remembered as long as humans tell stories of courage, discovery, and the expansion of knowledge. Your voyage has changed forever how humanity understands our planet and our place within the vast ocean that connects all lands. The legacy of Magellan's expedition extends far beyond the 18 survivors who completed the circumnavigation, encompassing the vision that made it possible, the sacrifices that made it necessary, and the knowledge that made it worthwhile. You've returned home, carrying proof that no ocean is too wide for human courage to cross, no distance too great for human determination to traverse, and no challenge too difficult for human ingenuity to overcome. The first voyage around the world is complete, but its consequences will echo through centuries as your achievement reshapes global politics, inspires future exploration, and proves that the boundaries of human possibility can always be expanded through courage, skill, and an unwavering commitment to discovering what lies beyond the horizon. Conclusion. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the eyes of one of Magellan's crew members. We've witnessed humanity's first circumnavigation of the Earth, a voyage that began with 270 men and 5 ships, yet concluded with only 18 survivors and a single vessel that barely held together long enough to reach home. This epic adventure revealed the true size of our planet, proved definitively that all oceans are connected, and demonstrated that human determination can overcome obstacles that seem theoretically impossible. The cost was enormous: 250 lives lost to starvation, disease, violence, and the countless dangers of sailing into the complete unknown. Yet their sacrifice opened the world's oceans to future generations and forever changed how humanity understands our place in the cosmos. Ferdinand Magellan never saw his vision completed, dying in the Philippines just months before reaching his goal. But his leadership, navigation skills, and unwavering conviction made possible the greatest voyage in human history. The survivors who completed the circumnavigation carried not just precious spices, but proof that the Earth is far larger and more wonderful than anyone had dared to imagine. Thank you for listening to this tale of courage, discovery, and human endurance. If you enjoyed this journey through one of history's most remarkable adventures, please like and subscribe for more stories that explore the extraordinary achievements of ordinary people who dared to push beyond the boundaries of the known world first voyage around the world. A Sailor's Journey with Magellan.